Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had a Flash Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Prologue. For as long as he could remember, Izuku Midoriya had been forced to run in order to survive. Ever since he had been diagnosed as quirkless, he had been picked on by the other kids mercilessly. In the beginning it was just a few harmless teases that the grown-ups saw as kids interacting playfully with each other. Something that was simply part of growing up in normal children. This escalated quickly over the years as more and more of his classmates began using their birth-given gifts to make his life increasingly difficult. Trip him here, shock his there, make him see things when there was nothing. It was something that could have made any other child angry and resentful, but not him. Under no circumstances would he allow himself to become a bitter or resentful person. His main bully was his former friend, Confronting Bakugu, who had turned on him shortly after seeing that he would never get a quirk of his own. It was just another thing that made Izuku's life even worse. Something else to slowly attempt to break him. The teachers saw Katsuki's quirk as something that should be praised, and this quickly led to the boy's inflated ego. With this new attitude and the rest of the class turning on him completely. With this occurring, Izuku had no other alternative but to run. Away from his former friends, from his new prosecutors, from the pain, and away from his problems. He normally attempted to run away from his oppressors to little effect. His physicality didn't help him much as he was one of the slower kids in his grade and tired a little too easily. Over the years he had gotten a bit of practice in the running department and could now manage to completely outrun his more vicious bullies given that he received the sufficient amount of a head start. This sadly wasn't the only problem that he ran away from, just the most concurrent. The other problem was closer to home, one concerning his dad. Izuku's father had been a head scientist at the world-renowned Star Labs and had been involved heavily in many of the new and exciting discoveries that came from there. The list of his contributions were countless. It was agreed that he was one of the more gifted inventors of his age. Hisashi Midoriya was a key figure in the labs, one who brought his best to everything no matter how small. He would have accomplished so much more with his life and family, given he could have had more time. A few years previously, the scientist had been working on something cutting-edge when a power surge occurred. This momentarily caused all security cameras and power to go off for just a brief minute. When they were brought back online, his workspace was in shambles. Work tables had been tossed on their sides, monitors had been smashed, and worse yet, blood sprinkled the walls. Still, no body had been found and the police were forced to give the family the only trace that they could find from him, his torn, bloodied lab coat. It was the one piece of clothing that his father loved to wear more than anything in the world. Izuku could not remember a time when it ever came off his shoulders. His mother had been distraught, falling into a bit of a depression and trying to get by. She tried to be strong for her son who had not fully comprehended the situation at the moment. This didn't go as well as it could have, her slowly gaining more and more weight till she lost the slim physique that she once had. Not all things were bad for the young, green-haired, quirkless boy though. After the death of his father, Izuku had decided that his childhood fantasy of being a hero wasn't as important as he had led himself to believe. The little evidence had led to there being no killer despite all the actions that could have been taken in order to at least get an idea. The police hadn't even been able to procure the body to give to the family so that they would be able to hold a proper funeral. This put Izuku on the path of becoming a forensic scientist, in the hopes that someday he would be able to find his father's killer and bring them to justice. Years later, it was a day like any other in Izuku's junior high school, nothing special in particular. The class was showing off their wide variety of quirks like they usually did, probably to something that the teacher had said. Midoriya sat in the back of the class lost in his own thoughts. He usually did this to make the day go by faster or to analyze a crime he had pulled from the net in order to solve it himself, a sort of game that he made for himself. Using practically no clues to solve impossible crimes would be one of the main skills that he would need in the future as he pursued his goal. Midoriya, stop muttering and pay attention, His teacher called out from the front of the class after giving him a slight slap using his quirk that allowed him to extend his wrist in a similar fashion to a slingy. It wasn't a new occurrence being called out by the teacher on the subject of his muttering, but when it did happen, he still felt the same embarrassment as his classmates sneered. The teacher smiled as he regained the attention of his beet red student and continued on with what he was saying. As I was saying, now is the time that you should all be thinking about your futures. I printed up some handouts about what you wish your desired life courses to be, but I know all of you want to go into the hero course, so there is no need. The teacher then threw the papers into the air and watched as the class went crazy and began using their quirks once more with large smiles on their faces. Bakugu boasted loudly about how he would apply to UA and none others would be able to compete with him. For the most part, it was probably for the best that Izuku, or Deku, as he was often called by his former friend, to have left his dream of being a hero far behind him. It had been an unrealistic dream, and now he had to focus on what was real. He had to keep his feet on the ground now that he had a purpose. After class late in the afternoon, Izuku pulled out an umbrella as he began to walk home. The rain had come out practically nowhere, and it seemed that they were in for a storm by the nature of the clouds. Looking around, he saw many reporters rushing over to one direction to where he assumed a villain had been. He had finally decided to go home after figuring out the culprit of one of the cases that he had been looking at earlier in the day. Using the lab in the school was one of the only ways that he was capable of doing this without the help of an added quirk. After walking for about 10 minutes, Izuku came to a halt and turned around on his way back to school. In his glee, he had forgotten to close the windows on the room that he had been occupying. The floor of the lab would be a mess in the morning if he didn't go and close them at that moment. He sighed as he looked towards the skies and saw them blacken. A storm surely was coming, and he would be forced to remain inside the school till it ceased in the case of lightning. It looked like this was going to be a big one, so dinner was off his agenda now. Well, this is just my luck. He continued muttering to himself as he made his way up the stairs and into the chemistry laboratory in which he had sat in for the last few hours. The young boy went over to the windows and shut them before any more water could spill onto the already messy floor. Izuku groaned, knowing that he was now responsible for cleaning up this mess which he had made. Seeing no mop in the room he was in, he decided to go into the next, hoping that there would be one present. The room he was in was something of what people would assume a chemistry lab to look like, given it was lined wall to wall with different chemicals. Closer to the end of the room, the mob which he looked for sat leaning against the wall. Walking over to it, he noticed the bright flash of lightning followed by a loud crack only a few moments later. He flinched slightly at the noise and went back to clean his mess. The streak of light in the sky was simply too far away to do him any harm at that moment in time. After a few minutes, the floor was clean and the storm for the most part had calmed down sufficiently for Izuku to return home. He put the mop back in the corner where it had been found and was about to exit the room when something caught his eye. In the sky, the color had altered to be somewhat of a purple tone. A few flashes occurred from within the cloud, and that's when it came down. The bolt that would change everything for him, that would turn his life in a way that he could previously never imagine. At that moment, Izuku Midoriya had been chosen for something greater than himself, something that would be unclear for a large amount of time. Even though to other people and to himself, it appeared that he had only been struck by lightning, he was changed in ways that couldn't quite be understood. He felt massive energy going into him, feeling every inch of his body with something that he couldn't describe, but didn't quite leave. He had only a fraction of a second to realize that he had been struck by lightning itself before he lost consciousness from the overload of energy from within. After being struck by the bolt, he was tossed into the side wall where several chemicals came to fall upon him. The combination of these events would have an effect that would change the boy's view on life as well as its course. After this moment, he would have power like no others had before him. The previously quirkless boy would be found a few hours later by an officer who had received a call from his mother. Deciding to look at the junior high school first paid off as he saw the state that the boy was in. From here, the officer would call for the help of paramedics who would work tirelessly to attempt to bring his heartbeat to a normal range. Then he was brought to the local hospital where he was to remain for several months while under a coma. This wasn't the end of Izuku Midoriya, This was merely the start of his new life. His new life as a hero. Chapter 1. Power, energy, infinite amounts of it emanating from everywhere, making its way into every part of him. It gave him the energy to keep on running for as long as he needed to, as long as he wanted to, and he never wanted to stop. In his current situation, he saw no need to stop the running. Although he was uncertain of how long he had been running, he was certain that this was what it meant to be truly happy. To truly be free, to run infinitely, that's what gave him happiness here. He felt infinite as he ran, there was no end or beginning to this. It felt as if he had been doing this from the moment that he had been born, the moment that he had become aware. The power was simply something that gave him some sort of meaning, something besides the quirkless nature that he'd been born into. The nature that had given him nothing but grief from the very start. As he looked around himself, he took in the space occupied around him. His surroundings were the most beautiful thing that he had laid his eyes on. It was as if all the energy in the world turned to color, every single color in existence. These colors spread to take up every cubic centimeter around him, and it was spectacular. This was a state that felt pure, and it was what he was certain death felt like. But he wasn't dead, was he? Of course he wasn't. He was simply that he didn't even know. He remembered going to school to clean up the mess caused by the sudden storm. The mopping of the water had been a very annoying chore, but he remembered doing it. Afterwards, he went into a separate room in order to put away the mop. It was filled with all the chemical that the students used for chemistry labs. He remembered a bright light followed by a cackling noise that could only be lightning. When he turned his head slightly, he felt an immense feeling of power coursing through him. Besides that, there really wasn't anything else to remember. That was the last memory that he'd been able to recognize before all of this happened. He had been in this state of perpetual motion, and he would keep going until it was all over. He would keep on running till he had something to draw him back. Izuku's eyes shot open as a doctor drew blood from him, causing the doctor to yelp in surprise and drop the needle. His eyes turned from side to side as he sat up and attempted to take off the several monitors that he had all over his bodies. The monitors began to increase in numbers as the young coma victim slowly came to be aware of things around him. The startled doctor, recovering quickly, pulled out a flashlight from his pocket and attempted to examine him to ensure that he was sound in the neurological department. Izuku was unable to use his voice at the moment as it hadn't been used in quite a while. He also believed that the light that was being shined in his eyes seemed to be quite annoying. Well, son, how does it feel to be part of the 90% of people who have survived a lightning bolt to their person? Izuku gave a look of confusion to the doctor, who only gave him a smile as he checked his chart. It appears that all your vitals are within normal range, that we should be able to check you out within a week after we make sure that you are in tip-top shape. The green-haired boy was finally able to clear his throat to get the attention of the doctor, who slowed down just enough to give him more attention. His vocal cords hadn't been used in close to a year, so he spoke quite slowly as he asked his question. Would you mind telling me exactly what happened? I'm not sure if I remember everything correctly. The doctor gave him a short nod as he put his flashlight back into his pocket and kneeled down to pick up the needle that had been dropped earlier. He scratched his head and racked his brain as he tried to recall the events of the past. Okay, about 8 months ago there was a sudden lightning storm which caught everyone in the area by total surprise. There were a few people that reported lightning strikes near their areas, but you were the only case of someone actually being hit by said lightning. All you need to know, kid, is that you were struck by lightning, doused with enough chemicals to start your own pharmacy, and then thrown against a wall at such a force that you caused a human-shaped dent. In summary, you've been in a coma for about 8 months and have been unable to move, eat, or even react to the most basic of interactions. Overall, you are lucky to be alive, but on the bright side, the lightning gave you abs, which we are still trying to figure out how that works. Just think of it as silver lining. Izuku gulped at the thought of that. Lucky to be alive was something that shouldn't be taken lightly. He looked down the inside of his gown and was surprised by what he saw. It really was something that he never thought would happen to him, ABS. His hand shook slightly for no apparent reason, but the doctor paid no attention to it. Instead, he was busy updating his simply relaxed against his hospital pillows, trying to process everything that he could, wondering exactly how much he had missed over the time that he was out. Without warning, The door to the room burst open and in came his mother all worked up. She had tears in her eyes as she saw her son's eyes open once more, the green orbs starting into the other green orbs. She ran over to him and gave him a tight hug with strength that rivaled that of All Might's, her heart full with an impossible amount of warmth to have her son all right once more. "Oh Izuku, I knew that you would wake up, I just knew it. I never stopped believing that you would wake up." The boy hugged his mother back with tears in his eyes as well. This was a reason to stop running, a reason that he needed to stay. There were still people who cared for him and who needed him in their lives. He was glad to finally be back in his mother's life, so very glad. After a week of tests, exercising muscles and catching up with the general news of the world, Izuku Midoriya was released from the hospital and allowed to go back to school to live his regular life. This, however, was a problem much bigger than he had thought to be in the beginning. Apart from being in a coma for 8 months, no, that really was it. Having missed that amount of school had been harmful to his goals. Today, Izuku, accompanied by his mother, would have to go talk to the principal to see what the possibilities were for him. Whatever they were, things would not be easy for him to get through. Inside the principal's office, Izuku and his mother sat across from the principal with his hands in his lap. They shook slightly, a shaking that had been there since he had woken up, but he couldn't get rid of it. His mom's hands also shook, but for a completely different reason, probably from anxiety. He was trying his best to pay attention to what the man in front of him said, yet it seemed slowed down, distorted to a point that it was difficult to do so. "Well, you see, Ms. Midoriya, Izuku has simply missed too much of school to be able to finish alongside the rest of his grade. 8 months of material of any subject missed would be enough to cause a retake. Izuku missed every subject. The only course of action is for him to redo the grade entirely and graduate in the year following to this." The principal had been pretty blunt about his answer to the duo, not wanting them to leave thinking that he could do it. He also had a small biases against the quirkless boy simply because of his nature, something that Izuku had no control over. Izuku looked at the principal with his hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't look the man to see them in the possibility that he would take his opinion as less. He was angered by the fact that he would have to waste another year here, another year that his father's killer was still out there. He had to speak out here and now or things wouldn't be able to be fixed. "Pardon me, principal sir," Izuku spoke up before his mother could, with his head bowed in the direction of the school official. "I can't simply let another year go by to be wasted. I know that I am far behind the rest of the class and that the chances of me passing are slim. All I ask for is a chance to take the final exams alongside the rest of my peers. If I pass, then I believe that that is sufficient proof that I am ready to deal with what comes next." The younger Midoriya remained with his head bowed, staring into the ground, hoping that he had done enough. The two adults were silent at the sudden outburst from the so often quiet boy. Inko Midoriya had read that some victims from lighting strikes suffered from personality shifts. This looked just like what she had read about. The silence remained for a few more seconds before it was broken by the throat clearing of the principal, who looked baffled by the sudden outburst. He straightened his tie before turning to the still bowing student. Mr. Midoriya, would you mind going outside and wait in the courtyard while I have a private conversation with your mother? We'll only take a few minutes and be right out." The green-haired boy straightened himself from the bow and walked efficiently out of the room with hints of tears in his eyes. "God, sometimes I get carried away with my emotions. Why couldn't I keep it contained like I usually do? Does this have anything to do with that bolt of lightning? Why does it all go back to that one bolt? Why does it always have to happen to me? Couldn't it have hit some other person at some other school?" As he mumbled his thoughts rapidly, the green-haired, lightning bolt survivor was unaware of his one former friend walking towards him with a scowl on his face. The openness of the courtyard was seriously a place that wasn't one to be alone with him. Memories of previous bullying experience came to his head. He heard him much before he saw him, the sounds of his signature explosions causing a ruckus that echoed around the open yard. Someone besides him must have heard it as well. The blonde flew towards him, propelled forwards by his quirk with a maniacal smile on his face. This was just like all those previous times, no one here to help him either. This was just like so many other times before, except that it wasn't. The closer that he got to him, the slower and slower that Kaken seemed to get. Seeing the slowly moving king of explosions coming towards him, Midoriya simply chose to walk out of the way as Bakugu pulled his right hand from behind and aimed it to where he had just stood. All of his actions seemed to be exaggerated. It was like watching a video while it being at quarter speed or even slower. This all happened as if he had slowed down the world around him, except for the fact that he couldn't have given his quirkless nature. Perhaps this was all just a bad dream that he would wake up from and realize that he was still at the hospital. This theory would be quickly dissolved in the coming moments. Effing Deku! The blonde screamed loudly as a huge cloud of smoke rose into the air, blocking him from vision. No one told me that you were awake and running again. Do you know how boring class was without having someone like you there? The destructive teen looked down and realized that Deku wasn't on the floor in front of him crying like he usually was. What the f, Deku? How did you manage to avoid that explosion? You were like 10 feet away from me, and there is no way that 8 months of lying in a bed made you capable of avoiding my attacks. Kaken, please stop. The panicked teen yelled out, wondering what in the blazes was happening right now. None of this made any sense to him, and yet it still occurred. He had just come to get his school situation cleared up and had instead found himself knee-deep in trouble. The blonde heard the greenhead yell out and aimed a powerful explosion to where he had heard it. The blast hit the shorter boy in the chest and knocked the air out of him. Additionally, the blast propelled him away from the explosion creator. This sent poor Izuku flying into the air and against a pillar where he landed at an off angle, effectively spraining his left wrist. At least he hoped it was only a sprained wrist. It wasn't the worst injury that Kaken had ever given him, but that didn't stop it from hurting any less. He clutched his left wrist with his right hand and his breaths became shallow and quick. He for sure hadn't expected to suffer from this type of pain on his first day back. Trying his best, he attempted to hold in the tears but ultimately failed to do so. No matter how much time had passed, there would be no escaping his one friend turned bully. Well, look at Deku, can't do anything right and now ends up with a broken wrist. He used a baby voice to make him feel worse about himself and to inflate his ego even more. Deku, are you just going to lie there and cry, or are you going to pick yourself up and go to the nurse's office like you always do? Maybe I could give you a hand if you want, just like old times. His sneer was simply adding insult to injury and pushing things over their limit. Izuku grit his teeth, from the pain, from the anger he felt towards Kaken, the anger he felt towards himself for putting up with this, for two had allowed himself to be run over by this boy for far too long, all because of some feeling of respect that he once held for him. Their friendship had been so long ago, he didn't know why he even allowed himself to see the other boy as what he used to be. This was going to stop now. Neither of them were sure exactly what happened next, but before Katsuki Bakugu could blink, he was lying on his back, unconsciously grabbing his face in pain. It was something that had probably never occurred in his lifetime, but right now was the first time. Someone had stood up to the ruthless Bakugu and had pulled the rug from under his feet to show him that he was an equal, nothing more than another student. This someone was none other than Izuku Midoriya, who was still clutching his left wrist after using it to punch his former friend in the mug. Midoriya looked down to his left hand in awe, still shocked that he had been able to do what he had just done. Bakugu looked similarly in shock at the fist that had finally knocked him down. For several seconds both boys looked at it, till the one of the floor came to his senses and bellowed at Izuku as loud as his lungs could yell. F you Deku. You and your quirkless butt. The boy still held his hand to his face as he approached his newly created rival. You just think that because you survived a lightning bolt to the face that you can come back and challenge me? You are dead wrong. You hear me, Deku? Using his left hand, Bakugu began creating an explosion that brought shivers down the other boy's spine. He took a single step before something occurred that made him regret taking that step. A flash of light occurred and Izuku stood over Bakugo's fallen body once more with a look of anger, possibly also some satisfaction. No more bullying, no more Katsuki Bakugu. Your days of being an a-hole and bullying me are over. No more. Izuku took several deep breaths and looked up to see the principal talking to his mom, who had a smile on her face. That probably indicated that everything had gone well. Point 1. Young Bakugu, what is the meaning of this? The principal demanded for the explosion quirk user to answer his question. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he was forced to mutter, bathroom, while staring angrily at the younger of the Midoriyas. "Well then, continue on your way, then off to class." The principal said it as more of a suggestion than an order, which made Izuku's mother visibly upset. It also made it increasingly difficult for the boy who had been bullied to keep his emotions in check. After the spiked blonde left back to his classroom, the principal turned towards Izuku and gave him a grim look. It was the look that he gave him when he told Izuku to not attempt to pursue the heroics course due to his quirklessness. "Young Midoriya, that I have spoken to your mother and we came to an agreement." A small smile broke out on the young boy's face as he realized what exactly that meant. "You will be given the chance to take the final test with the rest of the grade in order to prove that you are capable of going on to high school. However, since this is a test of what you know, you will not be allowed to receive any outside help and must thus do it all on your own. Additionally, you will have to complete all coursework that you missed by the time that the tests are to be taken." Midoriya nodded towards the principal. He was filled with joy at being given the opportunity to stay on track, so much so that he disregarded most of the principal's conditions. He bowed to the principal once more as a gesture of thankfulness and felt as the principal smiled slightly. "Thank you for this opportunity, sir. I promise you that you won't be disappointed by this decision." The grown man nodded and walked back into his office before closing the door behind himself. Izuku now had large amounts of hope of being able to do what he had wanted to do since the beginning. Upon arriving at home, Izuku immediately went over to the curriculum that he had picked up from his teachers on everything that he was expected to know for the upcoming test. The list was extensive and he knew that to accomplish such a feat he would have to do so on a full stomach, and also probably an annoying amount of sleepless nights. This led him into the kitchen where he helped his mother chop the vegetables at a faster speed than even she could pull off. He took zero notice of the fact that his wrist had seemingly healed itself. It was as if he never had the injury in the first place, but that would be illy and impossible. His mom took notice of this but remained quiet as she continued stirring the dish that she was working on. Her son looked happy, that what mattered the most to her. When the two sat to eat their dinner, Inko Midoriya was utterly shocked by how much her son was capable of eating. She often made a little extra since she knew her son was fond of having a midnight snack, but this was unreal. He ate with his usual table manners, but just the immense quantity was astounding. Since her appetite wasn't as big, she gave him her portion as well, but it still didn't seem to be enough. "Izuku, sweetie, are you feeling well?" The hungry teengar looked at his mother with a mouthful of food and a pet head. He swallowed his food before responding to his mother. "Yeah, Mom, I just felt a bit hungry, that's all." The older woman nodded nervously at this, unsure of what to say. After that bolt hit him, her little Izuku had changed quite a bit. Some changes were more obvious than others, but he was still the same Izuku that she had raised, the one that had wanted to be a hero. That night, Izuku Midoriya found himself unable to sleep for whatever reason. He attempted several times to slumber but was practically incapable of doing so. After being allowed out of the hospital, he found himself to be filled with energy that came from nowhere and also went nowhere. Wanting to try something new, Izuku got up and dressed in a forest green hoodie before going outside to see if he could rid himself of this extreme energy. Exercise had always been an activity low on his attention list. Quietly, the boy made his way out of the house through his window, trying to not fall towards his death. After a few minutes of shimmying his way down a wall, a task he didn't know was actually possible. As he touched the ground, the energy he had seemed to increase tenfold, almost as if the ground was giving him the energy needed. Putting headphones into his ears, and then his hoodie over them, he began to slowly jog in no particular direction. Allowing the music to flow through him, he continued to jog, increasing his pace every few seconds. Seemingly he couldn't get tired. Izuku wanted to test how much energy he had and how much exercise was needed to rid himself of it. His pace began to increase, slowly at first then faster. The world once again became distorted like it had earlier in the day when he had been confronted by Bakugu. Noise, motion, everything slowed down to as far as he could see. A cat falling out of a window, moving only centimeters from its original falling point. A man with a briefcase tripping and in the process of dropping a coffee on himself, except it was occurring too slowly to be considered normal. Grabbing his hair and turning around to look at everything, Izuku wondered how any of this could happen. A moment later, everything returned to normal and time traveled normally once more for the green-haired boy. Unsure what to do, he ran and ran. The wind howled as he ran at a speed that should have been impossible. This is crazy, right? This shouldn't be happening to me, it just shouldn't? My wrist. It was sprained a few hours ago, why isn't it now? Now I'm positive that this all leads back there, to the night in the... Lost in his thoughts, the newly established speedster rammed face first into the glass showcase of a jewelry store, triggering the alarm and giving him a splitting headache. He tried using one of the stands to get up before it fell atop of him. This dropped a pair of reflective dark green glasses onto his face. Combined with the hoodie, this did a good job at hiding his identity from the cameras and from anyone who might have been watching. He tried once again to get up and managed to do so after a few failed attempts. Along the way, he stepped on a few pairs of glasses and crushed them. Looking around, he saw the mess that he had made and mentally cursed himself for not being more careful. There truly was nothing that he could do in this situation. The alarm had been triggered by his entrance and the police would be here within a matter of minutes. He needed to leave immediately. As he made his way to the exit, while crushing a few more pairs of glasses, a shadow descended from above and fell in front of the way he had come through, blocking his way out. As if a light had gone out, the boy began to panic within his head. Oh no, this is not happening, not today, not ever. Why do we live in a world where anything that can go wrong will go wrong? Does everything happen right after I wake up from a coma? Does the universe hate me? He could tell that it was a hero, probably one of the more street-level ones given how he didn't recognize him. On his neck appeared to be an intricate scarf and on his face were a pair of odd golden goggles. An unshaven face looked at him and a large mess of black hair was atop his head. Hello villain, you can come peacefully or you can make my night a little more difficult, which I wouldn't appreciate. The man said with a bored and almost uncaring tone. So what's it going to be? Chapter 2. Confrontation with Eraserhead. It had been a pretty quiet night for the hero known as Eraserhead. So far he had stopped 2 separate muggings and a duo of men from breaking into a home. Both had been quite annoying, but ultimately very simple to deal with, something that he liked about street-level crime. This had been early on in the night and now, towards the middle of his shift, he looked around for any sign of crime, not finding any, which was amusing. As he crouched atop of a bakery, he thought about how things were and of the incoming school year that he so often slept through. Well, it looks like this year we are going to be having the symbol of peace himself come and teach at our school. That'll be a day for the media, not so sure about the staff though. He scratched at his beard slightly, watching a traffic light turn to red, still nothing occurring. Deciding that this area had no criminal activity at the moment, Aizawa Shoyuta stood up and began to move across the rooftops. The crime would just have to be elsewhere, it was always somewhere else. After a few blocks, the erasure hero turned around to look down the long street. Something was coming. A flash of green caught his eye, or at least he thought it was green. Since there was no crime in the immediate area, he crouched once again and watched this green blur for a while. Another wannabe hero it would seem, or maybe a villain perhaps. The older hero continued watching the blur's activity, wondering what exactly it was doing. The more he watched it, the more that he realized that it wasn't paying attention to what was in front of it. That was the conclusion he reached as the green blur ran straight into a jewelry shop head-on, shattering the front window display. Well, there goes my peaceful evening, time to get to work. Make it 3 for 3. He jumped gracefully down from the rooftop, using his scarf to slow his descent. He promptly landed in front of the hole caused by the would-be thief and stared at him closely. A green hoodie and glasses to cover his identity, but this obviously was a kid that he was dealing with. The structure of the boy wasn't that big, a bit scrawny if he was being honest, and a plain look on the portion of the face that he could see. Hello villain, you can come peacefully or you can make my night a little more difficult, which I wouldn't appreciate. He tried telling him in his most bored and uninterested voice so that he could cause him to be on edge. Most villains that he came across tended to be frightened by his mere appearance. This kid wouldn't be an exception. He shook very much, almost as if he was on a sugar high, except this one was probably from fear. So what's it going to be? At that very moment, everything that Izuku had thought to be true went out the window. At school they covered the basic things such as math, history, science. The hypothetical question of what to do when confronted by a hero in the middle of the night after running face first into a jewelry store had never been covered, at least not when he was there. It was probably a topic that he had missed while in a coma. He racked his brain trying to look for which hero this could be. In his younger years he had catalogued several heroes and their quirks. He used to pride himself in knowing exactly how their quirks worked and of being able to regurgitate that information on the spot if that was ever necessary. Ever since he gave up on his dream, he had simply stopped it with the practicing and had similarly stopped trying to remember that information altogether. His brain was literally going at 1,000 miles trying to figure out what ways he could get out of this situation. Okay, what do I need to do in order to not get sent to prison? There is no way that I can fight a hero head-on without suffering from a disastrous defeat. Let's see that he has goggles with thin gaps instead of just being completely solid. This must mean that his quirk must revolve around the usage of his eyes. His scarf must have more purpose than simply for fashion. I need to be careful about that and wait to see what he does. I can't make the first move here. I need to get him to leave that entrance open for me. Okay, I think I have this. Let's hope that this works out in my favor. Although the thoughts going on in Izuku's head seemed to have gone by over the course of several seconds, in reality only a moment had passed since the hero had last spoken. Izuku looked at his surrounding to see if there was anything here that would help in his fight against what he assumed to be an experienced hero. The two looked at each other with caution before Eraserhead made the first move. He activated his quirk and stepped inside the store, not yet utilizing his scarf in hopes of this being a quick and easy capture. His eyes started to become irritated from the constant usage of his quirk, but he managed to keep his eyes open. At this point in time, the kid is simply another kid at the wrong place with the wrong hero around. With his quirk erased for the moment, there wasn't any reason for this to be harder than it needed to. Kid, I'm going to have to ask you to wait here with me till the officers arrive in 1 or 2 minutes. After that you'll be taken to the station and processed. Izuku gulped quite loudly, knowing that he wouldn't be able to go ahead with the hero's intended plan, as it would likely result in massive fines that he rather wouldn't have his mother pay, not that they could pay. On top of that, he would be charged with breaking and entering or some theft charges which he rather not have on his record if he had any chances of going anywhere. I didn't mean to fall into this store. That it was a mistake. I am sorry. He was trying to be reasonable. Trying to be as reasonable but he could with a hero not exactly known well for that. The green speedster took a step back, trying to put more distance between both of them, not wanting to be taken by this hero just yet. After the first step backwards, he tries for another, but without realizing it, steps on what can only be assumed to be a pearl necklace. The round nature of the pearls cause him to fall backwards and cause the initiation of Izuku's first fight against a hero, or Eraserhead as he was known. As the green-haired boy fell backwards, Eraserhead attempted to catch the boy with his scarf, doubling as capture gear. Although that was what the real intention was, Izuku took it as something else entirely. The assumption was that this was probably an attempt to capture and detain him. Like any other reasonable person in the world facing the hero, he panicked and acted purely on instinct. Izuku wasn't quite sure how he did it, but he tried willing himself to fall faster, believing that it would somehow work. The plan was to run and get out of there as soon as humanly possible. His body responded to him, and so he did end up falling at a much faster rate than gravity should have allowed. Well, this is new. I will have to look into this later on after I find a way to get out of here. Still defying the laws of physics, Izuku rolled forward and began his way carefully to the exit, avoiding the dangerously round objects on the floor. He watched the hero react slowly in confusion as he himself started to wonder when his quirk would be put into use. Normally a hero would have used it already, so it was quite confusing when this one stood still and merely blocked the exit partially. The erasure hero on the other side of the spectrum had a mere second to realize that his erasure quirk wasn't working on this would-be villain for whatever the reason. Seeing that his usual tactics wouldn't work, he threw tacks from his belt pouches onto the floor without a second thought. If he couldn't negate his quirk, the less that he could do would be to keep him here till the police arrived with more quirk-negating technology that would surely be of use in this situation. As he ran towards the exit, the speedster put almost no attention to the tacks that were tossed and not the floor. Due to the lack of attention, The boy stepped on one of the metal tacks and yelled out as it went through both shoe and skin. With this large amount of pain sprouting so suddenly and his movements hindered for just a moment, the Erasure hero grabbed the boy's arms. Using Midoriya's own momentum, the hero tossed him onto his back, using the most simple maneuver that he could. The blow knocked all air out of Midoriya's lungs and prevented him from thinking straight for just a moment. He bounced once off the ground, and with this the scarfed adult made his move to capture him once more. This time he wouldn't be surprised by the capabilities of the young person. He made sure to tighten the area around the boy's legs and tied his arms behind his back for good measure. In the distance, Aizawa could hear as the sirens got closer, signifying a job well done. As he looked at the boy, he brought him closer to himself in order to examine him, trying to see what made him different. Somehow he had been able to negate the effects of his quirk, which shouldn't have happened. There was something about this kid that just didn't seem right, something that could turn into a real issue. Whatever it was, he needed to figure it out to make sure it didn't happen again. All the while, the now incapacitated boy was thinking of all the possible escape plans that would get him out of his current debacle. "Hey Mom, I'm sorry that I can't go to school today because I've been arrested after I fought with a hero, right after running face first into a jewelry shop, right after I discovered that I did in fact have a quirk, which I can almost bet my all-might backpack that it came from that bolt of lightning which I've already blamed too many times. Wait, what's he doing? Why is he bringing me closer? Is he trying to figure out who I am? Can't let him see me clearly, this can't go down like this. Use your head, Izuku, come up with something, wait." Without warning or grace, the entrapped boy reeled his head back as far as he could and shot it forward. His forehead hit the hero's nose, and in a moment of shock, the scarf around him came loose. Not hesitating for a second, the younger of two came into a crouch and swept his opponent's feet from under him. At that moment, Izuku didn't look to see if he had hit the floor but simply ran towards the exit, not wanting to stay any longer. The wind rushed past his ears and caused his hoodie to blow off. He quickly sidestepped to avoid running into an oncoming emergency vehicles, which turned out to be a police cars that was most likely heading to where he had just left. He laughed at this, regretting it immediately as he felt something enter his throat that was quite small. After this he remained with his mouth closed till he reached his home in the most unpractical form possible. He tried skidding to a stop, but the speed that he was coming at was simply too much for the soles of his shoes, which began to heat up and... This is not happening. Not with the day I've just had. Just a no. He yelled out in frustration as his shoes began to catch fire, which he was quickly able to put out. He ran his hands through his messy hair, unsure of what to do with tonight's recent developments. Leaning against a wall, he slid down till he was in a seating down position. The speedster rubbed his forehead, feeling the pain that was originating from the center of his forehead, which he had used to strike the hero. At this point he simply wanted to sleep in order to get a better understanding of this in the morning. He picked himself up and headed back inside into his bed in hopes of a quiet. If he had looked at the clock on his desk, he would have seen that only maximum of 10 minutes had passed since he had left to go on his run, a very interesting 10 minutes. Waking up in the morning, Izuku felt an intense hunger coming from his stomach that was attacking the rest of his body. Thinking with his belly, he rolled of his bed and walked over to the refrigerator. In the course of 10 minutes the boy would make his way through 2 boxes of cereal without even batting an eye. Following this, he proceeded to make himself a few peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in attempt to satisfy his hunger, a hunger that he had yet to acknowledge its origin. When Inko Midoriya walked into the kitchen, she had to do a double take just to make sure that she was seeing correctly. Her son had currently made his way through 2 entire boxes of cereal and an entire loaf of bread without seeming to be anywhere near an end. He seemed to have developed a black hole for a stomach recently, and this would be a problematic thing. "Izuku dear?" The boy looked at his mother with a mouthful of bread currently being chewed. "Are you alright? Recently you've changed and I'm not sure exactly what to make out of it." The young Midoriya swallowed the sandwich before speaking back to his mother. "Oh da crap. Does she think I'm doing drags or something because of my behavior? Does she have something to say to me because I've been acting so weird? Mom, you know how I was struck by lightning 8 months ago?" His mother nodded in response to the question. "Oh, that bolt of lighting changed me, and I think you'd like this particular change." His mom gave a look of confusion towards her son. Izuku carefully grabbed the plate that he had been using to eat cereal and threw it as hard as he could in the direction of the furthest wall. He ran towards that same wall and snatched the plate gently out of the air in a split second. This was followed by his immediate crash into the wall, as he hadn't thought of a proper way to slow down yet. This caused his mother to shriek in fear at what her son had just done, thinking that he had destroyed a plate for no reason. After showing her the plate in his hands, her brain began to form the bigger picture of what she had just been shown. Walking over slowly and quietly, she put her arms around her child and began to cry from the happiness that she was experiencing. "Oh, Izuku, I should have never stopped supporting your dream to be a hero without a quirk. That I should have kept supporting your dreams. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Izuku stood on the receiving end of the hug as he waited till his mother calmed down. "You can be a hero if you want, Izuku. That you are capable of being a hero, that just like you wanted." He thought of what she had said and of all the possibilities that were now open to him because of this new quirk that he had been given. He'd been given a gift, a quirk via bolt of lightning. He'd been given a second chance, a chance to be better than he had been in the past. This wasn't something that he could let slide by. He needed to figure out what he could do, and he knew of just the place to do it. Chapter 3: Birth of a Hero. "Okay, Izuku. Just calm down slightly. You've discovered another aspect of your quirk. Now think about all of this critically. What in the world did you do to trigger all of this? Just take a few deep breaths and relax for a few seconds before trying to go any further with all of this. You started doing your missed school work a few minutes ago in hopes of being able to knock some out before going to the principal and trying to talk to him about this new ability of yours that came up so suddenly. It was to talk to him about what would change now that you have a quirk. Also to see if there was any leeway around his high workload. Oddly enough, you were somehow able to finish a solid 8 months of work from a single class in just over 2 minutes. Not saying that I'm overpowered or anything, but it's just a bit excessive how much work there is for any one class. There were stacks of homework, classwork, and projects that needed to be done here. None of this should have been done this quickly. I should have been dying to complete even a fraction of the work, certainly not going through it as if it were easy. Now, with this in mind, what can be better than this? I can actually finish this year early instead of being stuck for another entire year. Now that I think about it, I can finish the entirety of everything that I need to learn before the end of the year. Maybe I can even go talk to the principal on Monday and ask him to take the test right there and there. The boy laughed to himself at the thought of figuring out this new ability and what he could do with it. This would probably be the most useful thing for him, seeing that he was a person who thought very much, sometimes a little too much. This is going to be very fun, isn't it? It had been just after lunch when Izuku discovered that he had also been given a quick mind, which made his life a whole lot easier. While completing his missed work for history, the boy quickly found something to be severely wrong with his surroundings. As he looked down to his pile of homework, wait, where'd it go? He looked at the clock in his room and saw that only 2 minutes had gone by since the last time that he had stared at it. He put down his pencil and walked over to his bed before sitting down on the edge. He was shocked to say the least, and that was putting it very mildly. Now that he had this new ability on top of his already incredible speed, the possibilities were truly endless. This was something that he could use to make his life much better, much faster. Well, right now he just had to finish his 8 months of work, with his super speed and faster than computer mind. Oh, principal, just you wait for Monday to come around. 8 months of work? I think I'm going to need to bring a wagon with me. Crap. It was obvious how he had been mentally and physically affected by the bolt of lightning. His completed work was a sure sign of it. That had been the mental part of his new abilities. Now he was attempting on seeing just what he could do on the physical side of things. Shorty, after managing to finally stand up to his childhood bully, he felt that he might as well see just what had made him finally go for it. After purchasing himself a tracksuit and some goggles, both green of course, the green speedster made his way down to a rather isolated track in order to test out his abilities. By make his down, the speedster was actually just running from corner to corner trying to avoid any person dressed in black in case he were to run into the hero from the incident. Reluctantly, he grabbed his same shoes from the previous day, not wanting to tell his mother about the condition of his shoes as it would likely lead to last night's activities. Apparently there was yet to be a brand of shoes that was resistant to high amounts of friction, which was exactly what he needed but couldn't quite get. The only places that one could acquire materials of that caliber were the hero schools that often tried equipping their students with the best that they could. Not that he didn't want to be a hero, just that it was something that didn't quite line up with his goals of being a forensic scientist. If it had, then he'd probably at least make an attempt at it, if he could be given the chance. After arriving to the track, Midoriya began setting up several things in order to see how fast he truly was and what other aspects of himself had been altered by the speed. Some hurdles here, a timer over there, a speed reader that he had bought which said that it was fast enough to see the speeds at which All Might himself traveled. He did some quick stretches in order to prevent any unnecessary injuries to himself that he was sure he could heal, but he really didn't want to try it right now. He remembered once in his childhood that he'd pulled a leg muscle and that had been quite painful for him. He did not want to repeat that experience, or the sprained wrist from the day before. After turning on the speed reader and wedging it in between a few bricks to prevent it from flying off, Izuku lined himself up at the starting line. Both hands on the ground and his head down, waiting to hear the beep from the speed reader. His head shot up and he ran as fast as he could around the track, which appeared to be in quite a bad shape. Pieces of garbage and bits of broken glass scattered across the track. Once, twice, 3 times. Round and round he went, increasing his speed little by little. He was careful not to step on anything that could potentially injure him. In this state of being, he was able to make out a bee in the distance slowly flapping its wings. The dust that he had kicked up upon his start was still making its way into the air and would appear to be a brown snow. There was no noise as he ran. All was quiet, not a single sound wave could enter his ears as he was in this state of complete and utter focus. The only thing that he was aware of was his beating heart and his shallow breaths. This was certainly a new experience for him and he wasn't going to allow it to be thrown away. Each step was calculated, every foot had its place on the ground, every single arm slide had a purpose. This was a good feeling for him, a feeling of control even when control should have been surrendered. In this state he was truly the master of his own fate, his own thoughts. This version of Midoriya was one that he enjoyed, a version that could slow down the world around himself by being faster. This way he could see everything that was. He felt an enormous wave of shock being exerted from behind him and wasn't able to help but look backwards to see what had occurred. This drew attention from where his foot went for a mere second. He stumbled slightly but his momentum didn't let him regain his footing. As he lost control, he heard what appeared to be a very loud crack. The area where he had been just a moment ago kicked an ocean of dust, and he continued to trip. At the speed that he was going, there really wasn't a way to slow down properly, and he just had to hope for no permanent injuries. When he tripped, it had been at the beginning of a curve, but now that he saw where he was, well, he was on the turn after that one. That was a tad bit painful, or more like extremely painful. Note to self, try not to break the sound barrier ever again. It hurts so much and I'm not even sure if this is going to get better by the time dinner comes around. Also, maybe look forward at all times so this doesn't happen again. At the moment it appeared that he had simply dislocated his shoulder, which was pretty painful for him, but there was a bright side to this. If his sprained wrist had healed in a matter of 2 hours, there was a strong chance that this slightly more severe injury would also heal in some time similar to that. After a few more moments of laying on the ground, Izuku picked himself up and headed over to the speed reader to see how he did. It was more like a crawl, but he was able to get there. He could feel the muscles in his shoulders slowly knitting themselves back together, slowly, but he could still feel it. He pulled his phone from behind the reader in order to record his results via audio file, which he would pull up later. Okay, so here I am on day 1 of training my quirk. Today I'm going to be putting it into practical use, and the average speed that I am able to sustain is 770 miles per hour. Well, that is actually amazing. It's unbelievable. Just wow. Okay, that's going to be the baseline that I'm going to have to work towards improving. Also, for future reference, attempt to maintain control after breaking the sound barrier to reduce the amount of pain that you will be put under from injuries. I will make another entry later on for the rest of the results from today. End entry. Putting down his phone, Izuku sat down under the shade of a nearby tree and drank some water. He allowed his shoulder more time to heal by leaving it to its own devices. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to drift off into a nice and pleasant nap. It was something that was just needed, a momentary break before he got back to. "Excuse me, sir, sorry for the interruption, but are you all right?" Izuku opened one eye and saw a general shadow of a person due to his eyes still adjusting. In one of his less brilliant moments, Izuku responded with something that was less than smart. "What?" Izuku opened his other eye and slowly he was able to make out the general features of the boy, or he tried to at least. "I was around the area when I heard a loud sound which I presumed to be a sign of danger, and I wanted to make sure that there were no injured civilians in this area." The boy used his hands to emphasize his points, bringing his right hand to his glasses after he was finished talking. "Well, this guy is interesting, let's see what he has to say." The newcomer took a look at the green-haired boy before his eyes stopped on his left arm, which looked severely injured and in need of medical attention due to its odd angle. He knelt down next to the boy and took a look at his arm, which surprised Izuku by quite a bit. "Your arm appears to be hurt, and you seem to require medical attention." Once again his hands moved in straight and precise motions, bringing a sense of urgency to everything that he said. "Yeah, I was testing a few aspects from my quirk and I wanted to push myself beyond my established limits, but I tripped and injured myself. It's alright, I should be healed in a matter of hours due to my quirk." The boy gave Midoriya an odd look, then nodded at the mention of a quirk. "I see, I too am training my quirk to be better so that I may pass the UA entrance exam." Izuku noticed that he said so with a sense of pride and duty. He was glad to see that other people wanted to go there besides his childhood friend. "If you don't mind me asking, what is this quirk that led to your injury and will lead to your speedy recovery?" He coughed at the forward questions, still not really sure about the full aspects of his quirk. He could probably get away with calling it a speed quirk and leaving it at that, since having a speed quirk wasn't too rare to see. "Well, my quirk makes all of my bodily functions go faster. This ranges from my metabolism to my running to thinking and also extends to my naturally healing process." The blue-haired boy nodded as he smiled, having found something in common between the two of them, though it wasn't much. "I too have a speed quirk of sorts. Although mine makes my legs be more like engines and is a mutation-type quirk, I think that the basis is the same." After having this conversation for the past 5 minutes, Izuku more or less wanted to know who this guy was. "Not to be rude or anything, but who are you exactly? I mean like name, since we've been talking for a few minutes and I still don't even know that much." The other speed quirk holder held his right hand up and put it to his chest, palm down, before introducing himself properly. "Apologies for not introducing myself sooner. My name is Tenya Ida, and what may yours be?" He offered his hand, show his interest in the answer, and also to shake his hand. He sure does use his hands a lot, does he not? I am Izuku Midoriya." He took Tenya's hand in his own and shook it. "It's very nice to meet you." The older of the two nodded with a small smile on his face. "So Midoriya, would you like to have a race to see whose speed quirk is superior?" The engine quirk user said this out of curiosity, wanting to learn more about other speed-enhancing quirk. "Sure, why not?" Izuku said this with a shy smile, not yet wanting to show another being of the true speed that he could achieve. Right now this was something that he wanted to keep to himself so that he would be able to grow. Showing it to others certainly wasn't on his agenda at the moment, at least not for a while. Both boys walked over to the starting line, kneeling as they prepared to run off. The shorter of the two made himself a makeshift sling with his jacket in order to keep his arm from moving too much. The other boy removed his coat and did a few stretches to make sure that his legs were nice and warm. "Okay, Izuku, we will go on 3 and complete a lap around the track. Sadly, I only have time for one small race before I go. Are you ready?" Ida watched curiously as the boy placed a pair of goggles over his eyes and gave him a nod. Instead of crouching beside him, Midoriya continued to stand with a slight tilt towards the line. His arm was in a sling, but he still continued onto with the proposal he had made. "Well, it appears that Midoriya is going to race me despite his injury. Even then, I have to show him exactly how fast I can go. Run every time to your fullest and you will win." His smile was replaced by an expression of grim determination as he readied himself for a quick departure. 1. Both boys dug their feet into the ground, ready for a quick takeoff. 2. Ida's engine legs began to roar as they readied themselves to go all out on this. 3. Ida's legs pushed themselves off the ground and ran at their limit. Of course, Ida wasn't going to cause his legs to go to their maximum. That would put him out of commission within seconds just before he could finish the race. He ran straight forward, not looking to either side or even backwards. His attention focused completely on moving forwards without any distractions. Since Izuku's new friend hadn't put any attention to him, he was able to slow down time around himself by running slightly. Like this, he would be able to study Ida's form of running and apply it to himself. He saw all of his movements in slow motion and recorded his findings in a journal for future use. There were a handful of times when Tenya returned to his regular speed and he was forced to run once again to create the slow motion effect once more. He definitely needed more practice figuring out how that worked in order to better apply it to the situations that he needed. After collecting all the results that he needed, Izuku slowed himself down enough to look like he was running extremely quickly without giving himself up. It probably wasn't the best thing to do a person, tricking them into thinking you were a lot weaker than you actually were, but he needed to keep this a secret for just a while longer. To Tenya Ida, what had just occurred seemingly happened in an instant. One moment all that was ahead of him was the finish line, the next it all disappeared. Through the corner of his eyes he was able to see as Izuku ran swiftly and effortlessly next to him for a few seconds and then sped off to claim victory. How he did it was a complete mystery to him. Well, not really. His quirk was seemingly more powerful about how much speed it applied to him. It was simply a stronger quirk. There wasn't anything to be angry about, it was just how things were. Ida, being a person of honor, went over to Izuku and offered him a hand. He wanted to congratulate him on his victory and for showing him that there was still room for progress on his own part. Izuku turned around and smiled as he saw the glasses-wearing boy offering him his hand. Midoriya, I have to thank you for showing me that I still have a large way to get to UA, and I'd also like to congratulate you on your victory. The victor smiled at the praise that he received from the other boy. I must go now, but with your skills I doubt that you will have no trouble getting into UA if you did apply. Wait, what? When did I mention wanting to get into UA? Before he could respond to him, Ida took off with his coat over his left shoulder. This left poor Izuku slightly confused and frankly just more confused. He wasn't sure when he had uttered a word about UA, but apparently it had been heard by Ida. His original plan to test his limits had been put on hold after meeting Ida, but he was sure that his stomach growled like a beast from the netherworld. Possibly the only negative side effect that he had found from his quirk was that he needed to consume a massive amount of calories in order to function. He went over to the shady part of the tree and took out a handful of granola bars from his backpack. Enjoying them greatly, he decided to check his phone for the time in order to make sure that he wouldn't be late for dinner. After all, his mother would be making katsudon in celebration for him acquiring a quirk, and he certainly wouldn't want to be late for a meal like that. He packed all his gear into his backpack before putting his hoodie and goggles back on. He was still pretty paranoid about running into Eraserhead again, and he just didn't want anyone to recognize him if he did slow down enough to be spotted. He placed his backpack where it belonged and began running, his arm now in a much better condition than it had been much earlier. Sadly for the boy, his sudden takeoff would result in his phone making its way out of his pocket and onto the foot of the shady tree where he had been sitting. While running, Izuku decided to stop by the store in order to get some chocolate which he believed would be beneficial to him later on, in the rare case that he should become hungry and wish for a meal that wasn't completely healthy. After all, there certainly wasn't a better way to regain lost energy than to eat chocolate in large quantities. He placed 2 boxes on the counter and saw as the cashier gawked at the amount that he wanted to purchase. It certainly wasn't imaginable for one person to eat an entire 2 boxes on their own. Smiling at their expression, he tossed all the bars into his bag except for one which he began to eat as he exited the store. He simply enjoyed the flavor of the candy after such a long day of hard work. Not only had he told his mom about his quirk, completed every last piece of work that had been assigned to him, but he also managed to make a new friend, something which he could not have said a few months back. Life was looking pretty great now that he wasn't in a coma. Now he could use the gift that had come out of that and use it for some good for himself and others. Wait, good? As in hero good, or just not evil? Ida said that I could get into UA. the hero school which people fight their way into. Can I really join the school? I haven't been interested in being a hero in a long time, but that was before I had anything unique about myself. Now I can run at speeds that break the sound barrier, before I could barely run away from my oppressors. If one person believes that I can become a hero, should I try and become that hero? Lost in thought, the boy didn't notice a man walking past him with a gun in hand, or slightly concealed more like it. It was a quirkless fellow who had just had enough of pretty much everyone. The people with quirks making those without feel like they were less. It made him feel like he was less and he just wasn't going to take it anymore. Someone was going to pay for all that had happened to him, and that someone was walking home by herself isolated and carrying a handful of books. The man walked up to the girl that looked to be about high school age and put the gun to her back. He leaned in and whispered into her ear, "Scream and I'll pull the trigger, you quirky freak." The hate could be heard in his voice, and the girl froze up as she felt the cold metal press against her back. "Now just take a walk into the alley and we'll have a chat." Reluctantly, she walked into said alley, her brain completely freezing from the suddenness and seriousness of the situation. On the other side of the street, Izuku realized that he had been given too much change, and when he went back to return it, he saw a man and girl that seemed around his age walk into an alley. He found this to be very strange, and instead of calling a hero, he went in to investigate himself. Most alleys led nowhere, and he was pretty sure that this one was the same. Whatever was occurring here couldn't be normal. "What are you doing, legs? Why are you moving? You shouldn't be moving by yourselves. I'm the one who's supposed to tell you where to go." Well, there isn't any more time. This man could be dangerous, and the girl seems terrified. Izuku poked his head into the alley just to make sure nothing was going on. Instead, he saw the man holding a gun aimed directly for the girl's chest. The girl in question had dropped her books in horror and looked to be frantically looking from side to side. She looked to be quite tall with a black spiky ponytail, which was besides the point. She needed help right now, and Izuku was the only one who could give that help at that moment. Both parties were about 10 feet from each other, and he began to run in an attempt to help, in an attempt to do something, anything at all. He tried running towards the man, to put a stop to this before it all began. If he could disable him and take the gun away, then he could possibly neutralize all danger to everyone there. Bang. 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 His plan went out the window right away, and he instead headed for the girl. His little experience with his speed would make it likely that he would overshoot the bullets or that he would be too slow. The only certainty was to try to tackle the girl out of the way. He ran more or less right into her, grabbing her and realizing the proximity of the bullets. He was just too slow to tackle her, so the bullets would hit him instead. To make this not hurt him more than he needed to, Izuku twisted himself and the girl sideways. A bullet went cleanly between the two of them, while the other two hit him in his left bicep, embedding themselves into the muscle. At the moment of contact, his concentration broke, and all motion returned to normalcy, which he did not appreciate in the slightest. First, he went falling towards the ground, which he hit in a pretty bad fashion that actually made him wonder why he just didn't stay down. Second, apart from suffering the force of falling down, he also had someone else fall atop of him, which could have gone better. Third, he had just been shot in the arm. Fourth, his arm had just been hit with 2 bullets. Fifth, the guy who had shot those bullets, which were in his arm, still had a gun, and he wasn't in a position to do anything. He groaned in pain, obviously the only thing that he could do at the moment. The girl, who was currently laying on top him at the moment, reacted a second right afterwards, doing something that Izuku hadn't expected, which was to say a lot. The more proper phrasing would be, something he hadn't expected to happen so quickly. Out of her hands, she produced a staff and threw it with deadly accuracy at the gunman, knocking the gun upwards, away from both teens. This caused him to fire another 2 shots into the air. Luckily, there were no flying heroes at the time going over the area. She then produced another staff, which she then brought down upon his gun-wielding arm. The man cried out in pain as he tried raising his hand at the girl who was causing him massive pain. This didn't happen in the slightest, as she used the butt of the staff to knock him upside the head, causing his immediate collapse onto the ground. The gun clattered to the ground along with his body, ending the threat to the quirked individuals in the area. The staff wielder panted heavily. Having taken down a gunman took a lot out of a person. She looked wildly around her for a second before she realized that Izuku was on the floor bleeding from his arm. She dropped her staff on the ground before rushing over to the boy who had saved her life. "Are you okay?" She asked him, created bandages and began applying them on his wound. "How did you do that?" Izuku fought past the pain before attempting to respond to her question. "Well, 2 bullets isn't enough to kill me, at least I think so." He chuckled a bit, which he shouldn't have done. The girl smiled at him, wondering how he would joke around at a time like this. "My quirk allows me to move at fast speeds, so I was able to get in the way on the bullets instead of letting you take them. I'm Izuku, by the way, Izuku Midoriya." After tightening the bandages fully, she introduced herself. "My name is Momo Yaoyorozu with the quirk of creation as long as I know it's chemical makeup. I'd also like to thank you for what you did. It's something a true hero would have done. Now let's call the police and get you more professional help." Her voice was very shaky as she spoke, but evened itself out as she continued with the sentence. She helped prop him next to the wall and tied up the gunman with rope she procured as he called the police, all while thinking, "It's something a true hero would have done. Am I capable of being a true hero? Can I bring back to life dream long thought dead? If I'm able to do good like this, then I would be able to help more people as a hero. I just never thought that would come to be, but it's a chance I'll have to take." Chapter 4. Tap, 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 tap. Izuku, the fastest person in the room, was currently tapping his pencil over and over again on account of having nothing to do. That was actually not completely true if he was being honest, or it was his truth at the moment. Right now he was trying to complete the easy task of figuring out exactly what to do with the remaining 2 hours and 58 minutes of the 3 hours that they had given to him. The they that he was referring to was UA, and he really hadn't managed to nail the speed of his thought process quite yet despite the time that he had been given to prepare. Due to this, the speedster had finished practically the entire test before he figured out what he was doing and tried stopping himself. The slowing down of his brain worked in a similar fashion to his running. It took some time to slow down after he had gotten going, which is why he was now simply waiting on the rest of the time to be taken up. Well done, Izuku. Now you have to wait for the rest of the time and sit here doing nothing. Or you could just go over your extremely short life and ponder about what you've done well. Yeah, that seemed about right. Let's just go into your mind and waste time. It had been about a month and a week after Izuku had stopped the gunman from killing Momo Yaoyorozu. Following the event, the police had come to question both of them while bringing in an ambulance to tend to Izuku's arm. A month and a week ago. "Son, could you please tell me what happened?" The officers at the scene were each questioning a separate person as to not confuse any of them by asking them questions together. On top of that, he had also been taken to the hospital as being a minor didn't really give him a choice in the matter. The thing about his quirk was that it had begun the healing as soon as he suffered the injury, so there was really no point to this. A few minutes earlier they had given him some pain medication in order to remove the bullets. In principle that would have been something that worked for every case ever, but of course Izuku had to be the exception like always. He felt the effects of the narcotics take hold for a second before it was gone, and he was back to being the same old Izuku, except now with 2 less pieces of metal within him. Turning back to the officer, he began to answer the question. So you see, I know that I wasn't supposed to use my quirk in public or upon another human being, but the girl's life was at stake, and it was just that my feet moved on their own. I'm not even sure how I got over there in the first place." The injured boy continued ranting on before the officer placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling him to slow down. "Son, I'm just here to get your story, not to imprison you for saving someone's life. Do you understand?" With a small nod from the boy, the officer continued to speak. "Okay, now that we have that cleared up, please tell me what happened," slowly. "I was stopping by the store to buy some chocolate bars since my quirk consumes large amounts of my own energy and I'd just come back from a day of training. After I exited the store, I realized that the cashier had given me too much change, so I went back to give the extra change back." The officer jotted down notes about what Midoriya told him in order to get a sense of the story. "Around what time would you say that this occurred?" The kid thought about it for a second before realizing that this had been about an hour previous. "It was around 6:30 in the evening, and when I returned I saw a man and a girl who looked to be my age walking into an alley. The green-haired boy ran a hand through his hair before continuing with his story. I followed into the alley because something just didn't seem right, and it turned out that it wasn't. The moment that I got there, I saw the man pointing a gun at her chest, so I ran to try to stop him from firing. I wasn't able to stop him from going ahead with the shots, but I was able to get in the path of the bullets in order so that she would be all right. After that, I was out of commission for the rest of the fight, in which she conjured a staff from her hand and incapacitated the man before he was able to do any more damage. Upon hearing the end of the story, the officer took down a handful of more notes before deciding that the kid had been through a lot for the day. He tipped his hat and made his way to leave, which Izuku couldn't help but appreciate. It was certainly something that he had wanted since getting these powers, to slow down for just a little bit. He leaned back into the bed that had been provided by the hospital and closed his eyes, waiting until the doctors came to discharge him. His rest was unfortunately interrupted by the girl he had saved earlier, Momo Yaoyorozu. She entered the room as quietly as possible, seeing as her savior appeared to be sleeping. She seemed to be coping with all of this pretty well, considering that she had almost died if not an hour beforehand. Then again, she had been training to be a hero. So being resilient was to expected. Mizuku, was it? The tall girl asked him in a quiet and calm demeanor, not trying to wake him up from his apparent slumber. The speedster opened a single eye and then the other to fully see her. I just wanted to say thank you once again for all you did. I froze instead of reacting, and you didn't even think twice about helping me. You went straight into it and tackled the problem head-on. Her voice became a bit shaky, but she maintained her composure. Seeing as a conversation was about to begin, Izuku sat up and propped pillow under himself. Luckily, he had maintained his clothing, which he appreciated for this situation, seeing as a hospital gown wouldn't have been a good look on him. Would you like to sit down? He pointed at the chair that was beside his bed, trying to be hospitable. Momo nodded as she made her way to the indicated seat, keeping her eyes on Izuku. Why did you take the bullets for me? This was the main question that had been bothering her for the past hour. Most people who knew about her family name would do it for the money or to get in good graces with her parents. This boy, as far as she knew, had no knowledge of her and had reacted within a second to save her from what would have otherwise been a lethal attack. I mean that you don't know who I am. You could have ended up in a worse condition than it just hitting your arm. Izuku's eyes drifted to the air above her head for a second as he thought about the question. Well, isn't that the question that everyone always asks? What is the correct answer for that? Is there a correct answer? Unsure what to say, he lowered his gaze once more and answered honestly. You looked like you needed help. The simple answer confused her, and the boy could tell that from her facial expression. What type of person would I be if I could do something to help but chose to do nothing? Besides, it's better to have 2 bullets in me than to wonder where they would have been if they weren't. He gave her a nervous smile, trying to lighten the situation, which she returned. So, are you planning on being a hero or something along those lines? She wanted to move the conversation to something else that they would hopefully be able to discuss without it turning south. Izuku, being the confident and smart person he was, simply shrugged, not really sure on the answer himself. I'm not really sure. His facial expression turned to be that with a slight frown as he thought. Up until recently, I didn't even have that possibility open for me. I'm not even sure if I'll be able to follow my other career path if I do go into heroism. Why not? Momo had obviously thought of something that was a solution to his dilemma. Other heroes have separate careers besides being professionals. Best Jeanist has a fashion company, Present Mike has a talk show, and All Might has all of his merchandise. She got up from her chair before finishing her sentence. If you want to be a hero, you can be that and follow whatever other path you want. If you were able to stop a bullet, I don't really see what's stopping you. Izuku's smile grew. Having someone finally tell him what he had wanted to hear for a long time was really uplifting. He was about to thank her for the uplifting speech when the doctor came in. Looking at him, Izuku was able to identify him as the same doctor that had been there to attend him for the week that he had been conscious. Oh well, it looks like I have to go. Taking out a piece of paper and a pen, Momo quickly wrote down her contact information before handing it to Izuku. We should stay in contact. Text me whenever you get out of the hospital and we'll talk. She then left the room with a small wave, all before the speedster could say anything on his part. He was a bit sad seeing her go, but at least he now had her contact info, so that was something. He placed the piece of paper in his pocket before turning to the doctor, who didn't appear too interested in his case. After that? Wait, what did happen after that? Losing his train of thought, Izuku's attention returned to the test that was in front of him. Once again, he went through it several times and tried figuring out how else to spend his time. That short trip down memory lane had taken a total of 10 minutes, which was nowhere near the time that he needed to waste. Looking around, the green-haired boy spotted a head full of blue hair that could only belong to one person he knew. He had gotten to Tenya Ida quite well over the past months, since he had met him that he had begun training his quirk. The boy had been a very good person to talk to and was also very interesting. Izuku smiled as he departed in the memory train once more, going towards a memory that was made with Ida the day after he had met him. It was quite fun, and both of the boys had gotten much out of each other's company, especially Izuku, who had no experience in dealing with quirks beforehand. It wasn't like he had anything else to do. Right now all he wanted to do was get rid of the time that he did have. Hopefully it was enough to get him through the rest of this test. Probably wouldn't happen, but still, one could hope. Izuku had been discharged from the hospital that same night after his mother scolded him for trying to be a hero. She was glad that he was alright, but it was still hard for her seeing her son's green hoodie with 2 holes in it. Needless to say, Izuku was sure to be more careful about dealing with bullets from now on. That night Izuku put a lot of thought into what Momo had told him earlier of having 2 careers instead of sticking to just one. It was interesting and something that he hadn't thought as a possibility at all. Sure, he knew that some heroes did it, but he certainly hadn't expected it to be something he could do before now. He thought of giving Momo a text, but he was unsure of where exactly he put his cell phone. He checked in his pockets, bag, and every other place in his room, but he was unsure of where he had put it. Wanting this to be over quickly, he went over to the home phone and decided to call it. If it were in his home, he would most likely be able to find it from its ringing. 1 ring, 2 rings. Hello, who is this? The voice on the other side sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it yet. Sorry to be troublesome, but I was wondering if I could get my phone back. I'm not sure where I left it, but I would be most thankful if I got it back relatively soon. Midoriya? Is that you? Oh, that's why the voice sounds so familiar. I literally met him earlier today when he wanted to race. Yeah. Ida, right? His voice was slowly increasing in pitch from the embarrassment that he felt towards losing his phone. Yes, I found your phone under the tree where you were resting after I returned to see if you were still there. Would you like to meet tomorrow in order to get your phone back? Maybe at the same track from today? It would be most convenient for me there if it's possible. If not, I can probably go to around where you live. No, the track is fine. I don't want to cause you any more trouble than I already have. At around 8 in the morning would be a good time. Now that how did I lose that phone? I'm positive that I put it inside my pocket, but if it fell then it must have been the hoodie pocket, since it offers less room to hold objects in a reliable fashion. That added to my sudden takeoff must have led to the flying out of the phone, which puts me in my current situation. Midoriya? The voice on the other side of the phone called out in confusion. Are you still there? All I can hear from my side is something resembling a quiet engine. If Ida could have seen him at the moment, he would have seen Izuku's face turn into a similar shade of red as his shoes. This was but another time that someone had called him out on his habit of muttering. To make matters worse, it appeared to have become faster due to his quirk. Yeah. Thanks again, Ida. See you tomorrow. Izuku wanted to end that before his embarrassment went up to a lethal level. The following morning, Izuku did everything as quickly as possible in order to get his phone as soon as possible. That actually wasn't really a statement based on facts, considering that he arrived at the chosen location 10 minutes before 8. To top that off, he was still suffering issues on slowing down after activating his quirk and was incapable of doing anything. Trying to use his time effectively, the quickened boy looked around and saw the grave condition this track was in. It certainly needed a bit of work to bring it up to functional use again, and right now he didn't think he had anything else to do. Mend a fence, sweep the dirt of the track to even it, fix the pull-up bars on the side, mow the unruly grass that had conquered the center of the field. After seemingly hours of hard work, the boy was done and more confused than ever. 5 minutes had passed since he had arrived here, but luckily he was slowing down and time was returning to its usual flow. On the other end of the field he could see Ida walking towards him, taking in his new surrounding. The boy with glasses looked extremely surprised by the sudden renovation of the field. "Hey Ida, over here!" Midoriya called out for his engine Quirk friend as he sat below the same tree that he had lost his phone at. He smirked at the obvious confusion that was on his face. Ida handed him the phone and began asking him a question. "Midoriya, did you do all this? Yesterday this place was a complete mess, now it looks like a professional track worthy of a runner such as yourself." Like always, his hands served as an indicator his character. "Well, you see, I got here a little early and I wanted to clean this place up a little." He scratched his head in slight embarrassment from the praise that he had received from the taller boy. "It was nothing, I just wanted to make this a place that people could come and actually use again. Apart from the fact that I was extremely bored." "This isn't nothing, Midoriya," the other boy exclaimed with his arms stretched around him. "That quirk of yours really is something else." "Hey Ida, on the topic of quirks, how do you use yours for offense?" "Mine is just a simple speed-enhancing quirk, but I want to know if I can use it for other things." The other teen adjusted glasses before continuing the topic about his own quirk. "My quirk is also a speed-enhancing known as engine. It serves as a car, allowing me to, over time, increase my speed more and more. My hands themselves don't have the same force that my legs do, so when I fight, my legs are my main source of damage. The increased acceleration of them allows for more damage and also for a faster disengage." Izuku nodded as he pulled out a notebook and began jotting down even more notes on the same page as the previous day. Once he was satisfied by the quality of his notes, he turned to Ida and gave one more request. "Could you possibly show me, against me that is?" This baffled Ida, seeing someone who actually wanted one of his kicks. "I want to see if it is something applicable to myself or not, call it a test run." Looking at him in deep thought, almost as if sizing him up, Ida gave him a small nod. "All right, Midoriya, I'll use my quirk against you only if you agree to do the same." "He wants me to what now?" "From your face I believe that you are confused by my request. All I ask of you is that you return the favor and use your quirk against me as well." With a short nod the two smiled at each other and made their way onto the field. This time Ida was dressed in what appeared to be a blue leotard that covered the thighs and shoulders. Unlike last time, Izuku was able to fully see the back of his legs and saw what he could only describe as pipes coming out of his calves. This intrigued him, and it would be the next subject in the conversation that was held next. Izuku himself had decided against wearing any loose clothing and had switched his track suit for a skin-tight one that didn't cover his arms and the majority of his legs. To improve his speed it would be necessary to show a bit more skin than he usually did, but he had determined that it would be worth it in the long run of his training. Without warning, Tenya Ida charged at Izuku Midoriya. He raised his right leg high while maintaining the left one grounded. His quirk was used to increase the speed of the leg mid-kick and as a result exerted a greater force. Izuku knew this last bit because he had been too busy admiring the mechanics of his opponent's fighting style to realize that it was being used on him. Ida's kick caught him in the stomach and caused the wind to be knocked out of him while at the same time sending him flying back. As he did fly backwards, Izuku saw Tenya ground his right leg before continuing after him to likely finish off what he had started. He did notice that to maintain a good flow Ida needed to turn a full 360 degrees to not have any abrupt stops. Had Izuku been a normal person, he would have flown through the air just like any other person. He would have been subject to the same laws of physics and gravity as everyone else who walked the planet, quirked, and however, wasn't the case for the resident speedster. He, like in his fight with Eraserhead, willed himself to fall at a faster rate, and so he did. Rolling backwards he managed to regain his footing and face his charging foe with a look of grim determination. He ran straight at the engine quirk user using only half of the speed that he currently had at his disposal. This was to make things more even and to keep a few cards in his sleeve for future use. Watching the rival speed quirk user carefully, Ida watched in wonder as Midoriya fell backwards and rolled away at an incredible speed. Normally he would have pulled off such maneuver and caught his opponent before they reached the ground. He guessed that this was part of the speed-enhancing quirk, but he had thought that it was only physical. Regardless, he continued charging at him till that he disappeared. One moment he was there and the next he had flickered out of his view. Perhaps flicker wasn't the right word, it was more of a blur more than anything else. A green blur that made itself directly behind him and caught him by surprise. He reacted at the words, "Peek a boo," with trying to swing his ouster leg a full 180 degrees around. This was too much time for Izuku, who was able to dodge the attack while at the same time dropping down and sweeping his legs. You know, I'm really starting to like this sweep kick that works so often. The winner of the spar watched as Tenya fell onto his back with closed eyes. He hit the ground with a pretty loud thud that mustn't have been pleasant. This of course only worsened as his own momentum had added more speed to the fall. That's quite a kick that you have there, Ida. Knocked the air straight out of my lungs. Izuku praised his friend, knowing that he was too self-critical of himself. It was one of those things that was obvious at first glance that anyone could see about Ida. He offered his hand to help get up and Ida took it. One recommendation I have for you is that after you kicked me you did a complete turn which took a few seconds. You might want to replace this with jumping off your supporting leg and using the momentum to keep on running. Thank you, Midoriya. I will take your advice into great consideration. The boy gave him a bow in order to show his gratitude. I would like to continue training alongside you if possible in order to better use my quirk. His sudden desire came as a bit of a surprise to Izuku, who had only just started with the use of a quirk. I'm sure. I mean, I can come back in like a half an hour to bring lunch and a water bottle since I didn't plan on staying long. Would that be fine? Tenya Ida nodded and went ahead to say one more thing to his newest friend. My quirk may not be as strong as yours, I don't know if it ever will, but I promise you that with your help I will try my best in order to be the best hero that I can be. I will not disappoint you, my friend. After that, Izuku and Tenya had trained most days of the week in order to better themselves and their quirks. The friendship between them had gotten stronger and Ida began to see Izuku in the same standard that he saw Tensei, his older brother. A figure that inspired him to be better and someone that helped those around him instead of himself. Izuku chuckled lightly at the memory but quickly disguised it as a cough after seeing Ida's head shoot up and looked around. He might be a fun person to hang around, but when it came to tests, Ida was sure to be the most serious person in the room. Looking at the large clock in the font of the room, the patiently waiting test taker saw that this time he had spent a good 20 minutes going over past experiences. Sure, this wasn't perfect, but it was getting there, slowly. 2 hours and 20-odd minutes was all the time that was the other test takers. This was obviously a problem that they needed to work against. They didn't have the speed that Izuku had and thus didn't have the same undying boredom that rested upon the boy's shoulders. It was a trade-off that he was glad for. He just wished could go the other way as well. He inwardly groaned as he attempted to find another memory within his head that would serve his time. There seemed to be none that worked in his favor. At least last time he was bored he was able to read not all the books in Momo's library. That was the one memory that should bring him even closer to his goal of 3 hours. A bit after practicing with Ida, Izuku sent a text to Momo apologizing for the inconvenience. He explained to her the situation in which he had lost his phone and that he had found it once again. She understood this and told him that there really was nothing to worry about. Following this, the two were in frequent communication, talking about things that all people talked about. School, hobbies, what their plans were for after middle school, and between then and the entrance exam this topic reached houses in where Momo then invited Izuku over in order to talk to him further about his quirk. Needless to say, Izuku was more nervous than he'd ever been in his life. Upon arriving at her house, the green speedster was even more nervous upon seeing the large estate which Momo called home. You know, it would have been a bit helpful knowing a little bit more about her before coming. Not saying I regret this, just saying that this is a total mind blown. Luckily there wasn't a servant waiting at the door to mess with Izuku's mind any more than it already had been. It had been the girl of the house herself, wearing a red t-shirt and some shorts. Like a good hostess should, she invited him in and asked him if he required any refreshments before guiding him into the library. Yeah, library was a good term for it. What else can you call a room filled wall to wall with books? That's not even the library she was referring to. This one was just known as the hall. Well, if I'm ever a hero, I now know what to look forward to, or maybe not to this extreme. Whoa, this place is huge. Izuku said it before he even truly thought it. Momo blushed slightly. Many people said the same thing whenever they did come over to her house. Sorry for not telling you about all this. Izuku noted that she apologized for something that really didn't need an apology. I should have told you, but most people tend to treat me differently after they find out about my family's wealth. Are you all right? She noticed the look of being completely lost, a look she knew from too much exposure. Why? His voice was shaky and his throat was a bit dry from the sensory overload. I'm just a bit overwhelmed at the moment, should be all right in a few minutes. Maybe hours. The last bit was in a mutter which she assumed was a cough. Well, have a look around while I fetch the tea. She made her way to the doors they had come through before turning back. I'll only be gone for a few minutes, grab a book if you'd like. She motioned to the walls before closing the door and running off. Well, looks like I have to wait for one of my friends once again. This worked out great last time. Let's see what we have here, The Old Man by the Sea. Never read it, let's start here. Like they always say, you can't go wrong with Hemingway. The book itself was alright for him, a bit dry in some areas, but overall it was a book that had made it to be a book which couldn't be said for countless of other things. Looking at a watch that he had recently gotten for himself, Izuku saw that about 5 seconds had passed. This was after he had taken a break from the book in order to go read another few books that were adjacent to this one. With his hostess still not returning, the guest went on ahead to read another book, and another, and another. When Momo did return with the tea, she yelped quite loudly at the mountain of books that had accumulated onto the table. Not since she had been here had she seen all of the books placed onto the table in such a way. It looked like it was made to be a mountain which she couldn't really wrap her brain around. Mizuku? Are you there? She called out for him, hoping that he hadn't buried himself under the piles of books. As she looked around, it looked like every book in the room had been pulled from the shelves and had been forced to join the mountain. Yes, Momo. The quick boy had appeared so suddenly that the creation Quirk girl reacted instead of thinking. Forming a staff from her hand, she swung it directly to where Izuku had appeared. Had he not been himself, the boy would have ended up with a concussion most likely. Luckily, his quick reflexes allowed him to see the staff coming precisely at his face. His two options were dodge it or catch it. He chose to dodge, which ended up having problems of its own. Momo's swing didn't just end at his location, but it kept going till it hit the cart that she had rolled in moments earlier. The cart was then pushed to its side, tossing the steaming hot tea in the direction of the books. Something that would look very bad on his part if it did end up happening. Not seeing where he went, Izuku rushed to grab the teacups and pot out of the air as he used them to catch airborne tea. He wasn't completely successful as a bit of tea landed on his skin, causing it to hurt quite badly. Upon completing this task, he used his foot to catch the falling cart before placing down all the pieces neatly back on their tray. He turned around in horror as he saw his hostess and friend falling backwards. This was most likely from being tripped by his attempts to save the tea from falling on the rushed over and on her sut as she was about to hit the ground. With his hand wrapped around her weight, time dilated itself back to normalcy. The slightly alarmed Momo Yaoyorozu's eyes went wide as she finally let go of her staff that flew across the room. She turned her head slightly sideways where her eyes met Izuku's, and both of them blushed heavily upon realization of their close proximity. What happened? This was Momo's question to the green-haired speed reader who had caught her a moment earlier. That was the first thing that she wanted to know before anything else. Still embarrassed from his current situation, Izuku's tongue began using the same abilities that his legs had for the past few weeks. Weliasaiminso sudden line divorcitis in Kirk Soyout tried to heat me the staff thadiu made and he stopped himself from going any faster than he had been going. He took a deep breath and repeated himself in a much slower and simpler fashion. You came in and I used my quirk to get to your side, which ended in you trying to hit me with a staff you made. This then led to you hitting the tea cart and I had to scoop it up midair so it wouldn't hit any of the books. Also, I may have tripped you on my way to saving the books, so I had to stop you from falling. Okay. Her tone of voice was a bit higher than usual, but he expected it to do so. Why is every book in the room on the table? Izuku's gaze went up and then down within a second before he responded. You told me to grab a book. So I did, a few hundred times. He gave her a small smile in hopes of lightening the situation, which it did. She gave a small laugh before asking her next question. Is it possible for me to stand now? Somehow, Izuku's face became even more red than it already was as he realized that he was still holding her. Oh, of course. He helped her to her feet before she straightened out her clothes. Looking around to her left, she saw the tea had already been served, probably by Izuku. She took 2 of the teacups and handed one to Izuku. Did you really read all of these books? Turning towards him, she saw that he was mid-drink. All that he could do was nod and her laugh. Examinee number 2234. Examinee number 2234. What's going on? Izuku's head shot up as he saw that a test official was referring to him. The test is over, please pass it to your right if you could. Hey, I did make it past those 2 hours. He handed the test to the person sitting next to him, which was Kaken. Stupid Deku, was what he muttered angrily at having to wait because his childhood friend had been lost in thought. He had survived the written exam easily, not really. Now all that he needed to do in order to make it into UA was pass the practical exam, which he was just about to do. After all, he had been spending the better part of an entire month getting ready for the most important test in his life thus far. Chapter 5. This is an extremely bad idea, Izuku. I hope that you know that I do not support your rash choices in any way or form, even if I am you. You really need to get your legs checked out to make sure that they are working like they are supposed to, because they won't listen. Each time that I try to tell them something, it always ends up being blocked by something like I'll have to listen to these legs once more and attempt to do the impossible like I've done way too many times already. I mean, seriously, what kid should be charging a robot several stories high in any situation? How did I even get to this situation? It all seems so illogical. Wait, I remember now. After finishing the exam, the examinees were given an hour of rest to be at their own devices while the officials of the school set up the practical examination. Izuku decided to use his time in order to stock up on calories, which he was sure to burn in the exam. At least he hoped he got enough. He brought out a box of granola bars that he had bought the day previously and began making his way through them when a spot of blue caught his eye. Hey, Ida, over here. Izuku called his friend over in order to share some of his snacks. How are you doing? Do you think that you did well in the written exam? What do you think the practical is going to look like? The other boy brought his index and pointer finger to his temple in order to massage out the incoming headache. Seeing this, Izuku saw what he was doing and attempted to stop. I'm talking at extreme speeds again, aren't I? That you are my friend, though I don't think that your speed is worse than that exam we just took. Despite having studied heavily, I wasn't sure what to answer for some of the questions. Ida then took a seat besides Izuku and was offered a bar immediately. Ah, you two always seem to have food on you, which I find most convenient. Izuku smiled at this, finding himself to be ever so helpful to his friend. As for the practical exam, I'm sure that they will tell us what to expect once our hour is over. The still eating shorter boy nodded at this seemingly realistic reasoning before he went back to his food in front of him. How about yourself, Midoriya? How did you fend for yourself in the exam? Izuku's face became very red. That was something he didn't want to discuss and make himself sound cocky or anything of that sort. Well, it was a difficult test for sure. I wasn't sure if I would be able to finish all of it and have time to go over everything. He swallowed his food before going on to continue lying through his teeth. Or he would have if Ida hadn't put his hand on Midoriya's shoulder and looked into his eyes. He had been able to spot some of the other boys' faults that gave him away way too easily. This was one of them. Is that really what you thought of the exam, Midoriya? He asked inquisitively, as he tended to do when he was trying to figure out something. It seems to me that you are in fact hiding something, or you did something that you do not wish me to know. The green-haired boy began scratching his mane of hair as he tried figuring out what to say exactly. Well, you see, my quirk doesn't really have an off switch. It sometimes just goes off on its own when I'm nervous or afraid. Ida's eyes went wide as he realized what this could possibly mean. His hand went to his chin as he thought about this before returning back to his friend, who was still eating granola bars. Does this mean that you went and did the entire test at the speed at which you tend to run? Midoriya nodded with a sideways smile on his face as he tried to find a better explanation for it. Well, you should work on bettering your mental control as to not get accused of cheating by others. Yeah, I know that. It's just so hard maintaining focus all the time, and sometimes it just slips without me even realizing it. I'll try to get better at it, it'll just take a bit of time. Nodding, Ida excused himself to use the restroom, leaving Midoriya sitting by himself waiting for what felt like the 50th time. He picked himself up and began walking around to see what this school had to offer. He mostly walked aimlessly, wondering what made this the #1 school to go to if one wanted to become a hero. The halls were obviously nice and clean with lots of room to maneuver. The doors of the classrooms looked like they had been built to allow people of all shapes and sizes to enter, and the floors were quite shiny. As he looked at the floor, he was unaware of a coming bend that indicated a turn onto the hallway. Continuing the path that he was taking, Izuku came crashing into a fellow examinee who was currently listening to some music and hadn't heard Izuku coming. Izuku was able to regain his footing right away because of his speed, but the other boy fell on his face and groaned in pain. Oh dear, I think I may have just injured Pikachu. Of course I would be the one to hurt Pokemon's prized mascot. Are you alright? I'm very sorry, but I didn't see where I was going. Are you alright? Izuku made sure to repeat himself in the chance that H hadn't been heard the first time. The boy only groaned in response, which made the speedster very nervous. I killed him, didn't I? Now my entire plan is ruined and I can't go on to become a hero despite just having gotten the motivation to become what I could do. Preoccupied by his own mumbling, the standing boy didn't notice as the one on the floor rolled to his side and began rubbing his head. Looking at the floor once more, Izuku yelped as he saw the dopey face of the boy he had just knocked over. Once again, I'm very sorry. Izuku apologized, trying to make the situation better as he offered his hand in order to pick up the other boy. As their hands touched, the speedster felt an exchange of energy and saw as the boy yelled out in pain before he went tumbling back into the ground. Ouch, I think that was my quirk misfiring or something like that. It's alright though, I've electrocuted myself many times before. Name's Kaminari, Denki Kaminari. Pleasure to meet you. The boy on the floor picked himself up and gave a smile to Izuku. Hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya, sorry once more for making you fall on your face. I hope that no permanent damage was done. Denki simply waved him off, not wanting to appear as if he had been hurt at all by the fall. It's all good, not the worst tumble that I've taken. The electric book seemed to be all right now that he was off the ground. Anyway, thanks for helping me out, I appreciate it. With not much else, the Pikachu-esque boy kept walking on his way to get ready for whatever presentation UA was going to give. After their 1-hour break, the potential students were shuffled back into the hall in order to receive the information needed for their practical exam. This time the seats were elevated and all the lights were aimed towards a stage in the middle, which Izuku assumed would be the place that the official came out of. Checking his bag on his side, Izuku made sure that he had all the materials needed in order to complete whatever the test was. Hello there, little listeners. Can I get a hey? Looking away from his bag and towards the stage, the speedster was able to see the pro hero known as Present Mike. Wow. They actually have pro heroes teaching at a school. That is something else. I wonder if that guy who attacked me is there? Of course not. They would hire someone like that. They are the #1 school for a reason. Preoccupied by his own thoughts once again, Izuku missed most of what the shouting hero had said. The parts that he did catch had to do with villains and of their various scores depending on the villain. A hand went up in the seats slightly in front of Izuku in order to ask a question. Supporting his head on one hand, the bored teen looked on in curiosity to see what his friend was going to do. Ida had been one to call out mistakes made by others, and it looked like this school would receive the same treatment from him. You mentioned 3 villains, but on the handout that you handed us there are 4 instead. He pointed at the paper that the examinees had been given when they walked to their seats. A mistake like this from such a prestigious academy such as UA would be most unacceptable. Unconsciously, Izuku nodded from the amusement and didn't realize that he had done it till Ida turned in his direction. You there? Ida called out to the seats behind him, not really being able to see who had laughed due to the poor lighting. This is a test for those of us who are serious about becoming heroes. If you aren't here for the same reasons, then you should leave. Midoriya looked a bit like Christmas at that moment because of how bright red his face turned. The blue-haired teen then went on to turn forward and listen to the response that was given by the blonde hero. Izuku would have done the same, except his brain began to mess with him and distorted reality, or at least the speed in which the world was going. Something, obstacles, something, run away and good luck. Yeah, I think I have all the information that I need now. Let's go over all these facts quickly and see what the plan of attack is going to be. There are going to be 10 minutes for me to get as many points as I possibly can. These points will be acquired from destroying villains that will be in the form of robots that get more dangerous the more points they are worth. There is also a 0-pointer used to block the path and cause destruction or something along those lines. I'm not really sure. On top of that, I have to compete against other people who want the exact same thing as I do. This is certainly going to be fun. Walking around, Izuku got down and began to stretch in order to make sure that he didn't pull a muscle or anything. He still suffered from that fear after he had begun running without warming up a few days prior. He had been able to heal from it relatively quickly, but he could still remember the pain. His mom did think it was a bit weird for him to be hobbling around the house that day instead of the usual speeding that she had grown accustomed to see. He checked his outfit one more time in order to ensure that it wouldn't interfere with the use of his quirk. His goggles, of course, were already over his eyes as a preparation for a sudden departure. His suit was more or less the same that he had been wearing in his spars with Ida, except that this one was newer and hopefully more reliable when it came to being aerodynamic. His shoes were the last part of his outfit, which were new and hopefully wouldn't have the soles rubbed off by the time that this was all over. He really wanted to make them last, and normally he couldn't because of obvious reasons. He spotted Ito once more in the large group of people but chose to not talk to him as it looked like he was trying to focus. His jaw appeared to be biting down, which was something that he tended to do when stressed. Going to talk to him would most likely break his concentration and could possibly lead to a poor score on the exam. And start! The yellow-haired man yelled from the top of a wall. All the examinees stood around and looked at the man in a confused manner. What are you waiting for? The practical exam has begun. A villain isn't going to wait for you to be ready. See, that kid in green is already going at it. All heads turned to look in the distance as Izuku ran off way ahead of the group, increasing the distance between himself and the rest of his competition. As soon as Izuku heard the word, start, he was off like a bullet. Bullet maybe was a little too fast for the pace he was going. He simply wanted to pass the exam without giving up too much away about himself. It wasn't like he was going to save a life or anything of that sort that would require him to use his full speed. Instead, he decided to stick with the speed that he had trained alongside Ida, which was to say approximately 400 or so miles per hour. Due to the speed at which the boy was going, he was unable to hear any noise going on around him. He was moving too fast at the moment for that, but the rest of his vital sense continued to work. With his eyes, he was able to spot a cluster of 3 one-point robots which he headed for. Okay, you can do this. The technique that was developed should be more than enough to deal with these robots, I hope. The speedster's strategy wasn't anything like any of the teachers at UA had seen in a long time. In their observation deck, they watched the monitors and saw that he was the first examinee to reach the villains. While they were unable to see him exactly, the slowed-down version showed him pushing the villains and running away. He used his legs to jump onto them and with the same legs jumped off their metal. The speed at which he went and the sudden stop caused the machines to continue the motion at which he went and were pushed into each other. The teachers straightened a bit in their chairs and leaned slightly forward. This was certainly a new and intriguing quirk that they hadn't seen before. Something new which could be cultivated into something great. The headmaster had a smile on his small animal-like face, pleased to see such promising talents. The other teachers had similar looks on their faces, with the exception of 2 of them. The number 1 hero's face had gone blank and paled considerably after seeing the boy in the slow motion. Something his old master had told him came to mind, but he quickly tossed it away, believing that it couldn't be true. It was something that he would have to talk with Gran Torino later, but right now he would continue with this. The other teacher that wasn't so pleased by this was one known as Eraserhead. For the better part of a month he had been looking for someone who matched the power set of the kid that he had run into that night but had come out dry each night. His eyes glowed with satisfaction at finally being able to put a name to the one who had outdone him. Run while you can, kid. You and I will be having a conversation very soon. There we go. Another 3-pointer for the count that should bring me up to 23 points if I count the one that I hit before the naval loser kid stole it. Can't take too many points for myself. I just need enough to get me into the school, which was 30, I think. I should have put more attention to present Mike. Well, that's for next time. The green blur ran all across the model city looking for villains to defeat. After the rest of the students caught up to him, he found it increasingly more difficult to accelerate and decelerate with the wide variety of quirks affecting the landscape. More and more hazards sprung up from all around him, and he also didn't feel comfortable taking points from other participants. Spotting yet another 3-pointer, Izuku made a V-line for it, trying to claim the points for himself before anyone else could do the same. This one, unlike the others before it, was able to recognize him before he reached it and fired its missiles. They weren't overly big, but there were 4 of them coming straight towards him, and he wanted nothing to do with any of them for his own sake. Wait, these things are moving really slow. I want to try something to see if it's going to work. The first 2 that came drifted harmlessly besides him, not really coming close due to their slower pace. The third one fell a bit short of its target location, and Izuku had to jump over it in order to not go boom. Number 4 was the missile that he was looking for, and it was right there, right in his grasp. He took it and, like a madman, redirected the missile to where it had just come from. Trying to be a movie trope, the boy turned around and began walking away when he was blown right onto his face. Note to self, always make sure to look at the explosion. Not looking at it just makes it more likely that you are going to hurt yourself and probably end up with, yep, that's a broken nose. The faster healing better come up with a fix for this. Picking himself up, Izuku's new score was now 26 points, which he assumed to be not bad. There were times when he could have gotten more, but that would mean using more of the speed that he was busy concealing at the moment. Doing another lap around the test area, the boy with 26 points saw that the majority of the villains had already been dealt with and the remaining ones were already in combat with a few examinees. Slowing himself to a more reasonable pace in which he began to hear things clearly again. Yep, the sound of conversation was one of the things that he missed while being in his quickened state. Looking around, everything seemed to be just a tad bit too quiet. He pulled up his green-tinted goggles and gave everyone else a look. They all appeared as if they were done with the exam and were all just lounging around waiting for time to be called. Izuku himself had burned through quite a bit of energy and was ready to replenish himself with the granola bars that were in his backpack. Just when he began to make his way back, things took a big drop in how they were going. He heard it before he saw it, or at least heard the destruction in its path, that is. The loud crashes all around him had him activating his quirk once again and turn around. With his enhanced speed, he was able to see the 100-foot-tall 0-pointer that he had assumed would be way smaller. Well, I think my brain just broke from the sheer size of this thing. He froze for a second as the villain continued rampaging down the street as it destroyed more and more buildings. Around him, people ran away from the incoming contraption as he maintained his spot, looking on in slight fear. He tried taking a step back but fell backwards, unsure of what to do, fear deep in his heart. Just get up, Izuku. Just get up and run away. You can't beat this thing with your speed. Just run away. Do it to save yourself. More participants ran away from the contraption, trying to remain alive till the time run away. Picking himself up, he ran away, obviously incapable of doing much of anything. He frowned, not being able to control his quirk properly. Receiving random bits of speed, the boy began running into walls, unable to run properly without the control. Calm down, just calm down so you can control yourself again. You can't save yourself if you continue with this fear. Just take a deep breath and run. Looking back, he saw a girl with brown hair that was trapped under a giant piece of rubble. He could do nothing to lift it, having his abilities amplify his speed and not his strength. The giant obstacle grew ever closer and he closed his eyes in order to think, to clear his mind and in order to do what needed to be done. In doing this, he entered the state that he had done during the written exam and his mind raced. Izuku Midoriya, the speedster, the 8-month-long coma patient, the green blur. It's not your job to save this girl, but at the same time it is. If it's in your power, then you have no other choice but to at least try. You might get hurt, but if you thought about your injuries before acting, then some people you know would be dead. Just run now. Slipping his goggles back over his eyes, he closed his eyes once more and took a deep breath, allowing his mind and heart to relax. His eyes sparked with green flickers of electricity as he opened them one more. He smiled slightly at the sudden surge of energy that he felt after calming down. His control over his speed had returned once more to him. There really wasn't more that could be said at what happened next. He ran. At first all the examinee looked as the blur in green ran away from the problem. He would be the one to outrun them all and remain the most safe if the time didn't run out soon. They saw it run past them and disappear in the distance, probably wouldn't return for any of them. Then, they all looked in awe as the speedster came back, running straight for the robot that was terrorizing the street. His movements were precise, each arm slide, each step, each breath was calculated. His eyes looked at the metal man, looking for a weakness where he could find it. His speed would make his punches cause greater damage than a normal human fist, but there was only so much that it could do. He felt a bit of a shake as he recognized the same feeling of breaking the sound barrier. Closer and closer he got, pushing himself forward with each step, going faster, pushing farther. This is it, Izuku, one last push. With that though, the boy dressed in green forced himself to go over the edge and put more energy than he thought possible. He jumped off the ground, or pushed himself off actually. He was a human bullet at the moment, deadly and dangerous. He flew through the air, feeling his messy green hair fly behind him. There was a moment longer for his decision to take place, the deadly choice of destroying the chaotic machine. He looked for any place to make his strike, and he found it. Pulling his arm backwards, the boy waited for just the right moment before striking. He went for the neck of the creature, that most likely being the weakest part of its structure in exchange for the enhanced mobility that the part offered. His right arm hit the part which could be called a neck, and something occurred that no one could truly expect. First, the recoil of the impact made its way through his arm and broke it. The energy that had been released had simply been too much. Second, a thin break began to stem from the point of contact, and it began to increase in size. Third, the boy who had just hit the robot began falling backwards and downwards quickly and without any particular direction. The pain in his arm hadn't yet registered, but when it did, now that would be a jolly day for him. Fourth, the piece of machinery had its head fall backwards and the rest of the body soon followed as it went up in a spectacular display. Falling through the air, the boy had a limited amount of time to think about possible solutions as there weren't so many. His quirk could only work on the ground and not much else. It wasn't like he could defy laws of physics that had been set in place much longer than he had been around. Try Izuku, try to figure out something. The ground quickly approached and the choices still weren't any clearer than they had been in the start. Okay, let's try to roll and see if that works. He was out of options, nothing he could do would be much of use now. He had to hope for a Hail Mary and slept. There was a sudden sense of both pain and weightlessness. He looked sideways to see the girl who had been caught under the rubble a few moments earlier. Her face was strained in focus and her hands pressed together, probably something to do with her given quirk. As she let her hands fall apart, he too fell towards the ground. At least now it was only a few feet off. Trying to use his hands out of habit, Midoriya regretted the choice in an instant as pain shot up his right hand and he was forced to bring it to his chest. He saw and heard the hero from the presentation informing them of the ending of the test. The hero with the broken arm sighed in relief of no longer having to run, but was quite angered at having this broken arm which would take more time than any of his previous injuries had. Bringing himself to a seated position, the young male pulled off his goggles and looked at them in sadness. One of the lenses had completely fallen out and shattered while the other had quite a large break in them that was unlikely to fix. His shoes were also a very large problem given that one of them had actually caught fire. He kicked it off and groaned at the thought of having to get another pair that would be able to handle his running speeds. Maybe it was due to the pain, maybe due to going into shock, maybe it was because he had run well past his previously established limit. Whatever the reason was, Izuku certainly couldn't account for the fact that he was in his room sitting on his bed and looking at his notebook with a logo design on it. He remembered a fire involving one of his shoes, but that was about it. There wasn't much after that. An old lady giving him a kiss to heal his arm, a few praises from fellow participants, and some rainbow vomit? Well, Izuku, looks like you did it. You finally did it. You were able to do what many told you was impossible. Collapsing onto his bed, the boy succumbed to a well-earned rest. His mother came into his room and smiled as she saw her son asleep. She was proud of what he had accomplished and would continue to support him as he continued on his path to be a hero. She looked at his desk and turned off the lights before closing the door. On his desk, there was the logo that Izuku had decided upon as he got home that day. In its entirety, it was simply a bolt of lighting inside a circle, but that was for a later time. Chapter 6. Every day for a week after the UA entrance exam, the speedster came back from school and checked the mail for any signs. Each time he went through the door, he checked to see if an acceptance letter from UA had arrived. Even a rejection letter would have been nice at this point. He just really wanted the sense of worry and being unsure to end. After a while, he had begun to simply pace around his room, which was a terrible idea if one thought of the floor. Without his knowledge, he activated his speed and paced over the same spot over and over again within a matter of seconds that applied lots of friction to the floor and nearly ruined it. Nearly being that after a carpet was put on it looked completely normal. They said 1 week. Or was it 2 weeks? I don't remember much after running at that ginormous machine. Never knew I could do that much damage, but I suppose that now I can if I picked up enough speed by running for a while. Looks like yet another skill that I have to work to develop into something concrete that works most times. Without me ending up with a shattered arm, that is. After a bit of pacing, the boy decided to sink into his bed and wonder what to do about his situation. He wasn't sure what to do and still wasn't fully sure if he'd received the required amount of points. His eyes looked straight at the ceiling as if asking it to solve the problems that he currently held. Midoriya closed them in order to give them a bit of rest from the activity that he had been repeating for several days. That activity, of course, was asking the roof to solve the problems that he knew couldn't be solved like this. He had called Ida to find out if he had received his letter yet. His friend had gone on a long lecture about who cares, and the final answer ended in him having received his the previous day. Of course, the engine. Quirk using teen had got in considering the sheer amount of dedication that he had put in. Izuku was less sure if he'd be accepted considering how late he submitted his interest for the school, seeing how other people entered their applications as soon as the enrollment option became available. Momo would also be given a spot in the prestigious school through recommendations, which in itself was an amazing task. She's been able to skip the entire process of taking the written test as well as the practical, which made him a bit envious of her. Then again, she wouldn't have seen him with the broken arm, as she would have scolded him in not being more careful about it. After all, she had been trying to get him to test some formulas using his speed to see what was the safest speed that he would be able to go without hurting himself. There was a loud yell at the front door, so Izuku went to check what it was. Hey, maybe this time it is my letter, wouldn't that be something? As he poked his head out of his door, his mother was kneeling down in front of the mail slot holding something which had the letter U and A on them. Maybe that letter contains $1 million, wouldn't that be something? Aye, Izuku. The letter from UA. It's here. His mother yelled this to him despite the fact that he was literally standing 5 feet away from her. He didn't mind though, he too would be yelling if his throat hadn't closed itself from this shock. The boy's mind went blank as he took the letter from his mother and walked into his room. At least he tried doing it a few times. His door was closed and he didn't notice it for a few tries. After he did open the door and enter his room, he went to his desk and sat down while looking at his letter. The speedster simply looked at it for the longest time before he acted, wondering what to do with the envelope. Ripping the envelope down the middle, a small disc-like object fell from the paper and landed in front of him. As he touched it, the machine hummed to life and began emitting a set of lights of all colors. It continued for a few seconds till the lights joined together in order to make a flat image in the air. UA's logo appeared and Midoriya's heart felt a bit faint. It was all too much for him. That was until the image changed to be that of a hero that he had met a few weeks prior. The video version of the hero pulled out a paper and began reading off of it without much interest. He didn't even bother to look up from the page as he read and addressed Izuku. If anything, he looked to be more interested in his paper than Izuku himself. Hello Izuku Midoriya, I am here to tell you of your results from the exam via hologram. I suppose you could call this sort of mail now. I am here to tell you that you passed the written exam without any errors in the shortest amount of time that UA has ever seen. That was what the exam overseer told us. The odd green-haired kid just stared at the clock for close to 2 hours. Was his exact quote of you. Your performance in practical exam also managed to impress the panel, which is why you will be accepted into the school starting in 2 weeks. Izuku's smile grew to compete with that of All Might's. He truly didn't know what to do with the amount of sheer joy that he felt at the moment. It was unreal how far he'd come in such a short amount of time. Just 2 months ago he was in a state of coma atop of a hospital bed with no end in sight. Now he was entering the #1 hero school, which was just hard to think about. Oh Midoriya, I also neglected to mention one little fact. Izuku's smile decreased in size by a significant amount, believing that he knew where this was going. As you know, last time that we met wasn't under the best of circumstances. Andy would very much like to meet in order to set the record straight. I will be notified of when this video ends, so I am asking you to meet me at Dagoba Beach in, let's say, 1 minute. Yeah, a minute should serve the purpose. Don't be late. He said, what now? That's not a thing he expects me to do, right? This guy is a bit irrational, but still that's a bit too irrational. He won't actually be there. There was the chance that I wouldn't open my letter for a few days. Would he have waited a few days at his current location? Of course not. Well, what do I know? I just have to hope that this isn't a joke and that he sticks with his end of this and doesn't leave me by myself on a beach. Obviously, the speedster ran for his dear life in hopes that if this was true, then the hero would be nice to him for arriving within the time that was given to him. He tried making the most of each stride in order to get there in less than a minute, but sadly he had no idea where he was going and had to look for a map. On top of this, the speedster overshot his destination by a few miles and had to go back to where a beach was supposed to be. He mentally cursed himself for not getting out more often to explore the city, which he would begin doing from now on. As he arrived to his desired location, Izuku looked around to see heaps of trash as far as the eye could see. Looking at the map again to make sure this was a beach, Izuku became oblivious to his surroundings. He knew that splitting his attention was something that needed to be worked on, but he had never fully mastered a skill such as that. If there had been a person watching him at that very moment, then he probably would have been unprepared for any attacks that came his way. Wait, that was exactly what happened to the green-haired boy, silly boy. While looking down at the map of the area, a figure descended from a pile of trash that was nearby and, for a lack of a better word, repaid the favor from before. The erasure hero, better known as Shoyuta Aizawa, sideswept the boy, removing his main weapon, his legs. Izuku became aware of his presence in the air, but there was really nothing that he could do to save himself now. Eraserhead willed his capture gear to wrap around the boy's entire body, much like the first time. This time, much to Izuku's disappointment, he also wrapped it around the lower part of his head and then proceeded to hang him upside down. Izuku struggled for a few seconds, tried to break free, but the bindings only increased their hold on him. Upon giving up, the boy looked slightly downwards at the hero who had just gotten even with him. Well, this is certainly something that I did not expect to happen, especially sweeping my legs. Now I can understand where that was coming from. I expected more from you than simply charging in here, without first taking in your surroundings. The erasure hero pulled up his goggles to look at the boy with a bored expression. I'm making sure that the last time's outcome won't happen again. I found it a bit damaging to my ego of losing to a child. At this, Izuku began struggling again, trying to clarify what was going on, but with his mouth blocked there really wasn't anything that could be heard than a few muffled screams. Does he seriously think that I'm a bad guy? There can't honestly be a reason for it, right? I mean, he's clearly someone at UA if he was in my acceptance letter video. If that's true, then he probably saw how I did in the entrance exam and then would be able to determine that I in fact am not a villain. I just have to tell him that with these bindings over my mouth. Relax. Izuku calmed down a bit and stopped struggling for a few seconds, willing to hear the hero out. I know that you aren't a villain. A villain wouldn't have come here in the first place, unless he were an idiot. I just want to talk to you, so if you agree to not run away, I'll put you down. Izuku nodded eagerly, knowing that this was the only way that he would be able to reason with the street-level hero. Thank you, the boy said as he was put back onto the ground. His face felt quite hot due to the blood rushing to his head. Likewise, his feet had received none and he fell onto the floor as soon as he touched it once more. So, what did you want to talk about, Mr. Eraserhead? Aizawa's eyes increased slightly from having his name called out by the boy in front of him, obviously not amused by him. I did a little research on you and am just as confused about my condition. I can clearly see that you have a quirk, but it doesn't work like other people's quirk now, does it? Izuku shook his head to this, trying to be as truthful as he could be. I thought as much. My quirk should have served to neutralize yours, yet I was unable to do it during our first encounter and just now when you zoomed past. If that's not the case, then I'd like to hear more about you, the origins of your abilities. I have my suspicions, but I'd like to hear it from you. Well, you see, it's very strange to explain this. You are the first person to know the full truth since everyone else just assumed that I'm a late bloomer. Well, where to start at? Oh yeah. About 10 months ago I was staying late at school when I went back to close the windows as to not cause a bigger mess that I'd have to clean up in the morning. There was a sudden shift in the weather that day that took me by surprise and I just didn't think anything of it, so I went on and did my thing. I was then struck by a bolt of lightning and doused in chemicals which forced me into a coma for about 8.5 months. I'm not sure exactly how my body changed, but I know that I was given the speed which you see before you. The first time that we met was actually the first time that I was able to use my quirk properly. I've been practicing for about a month, but I'm still not in full control of my quirk yet. It's constantly revealing new parts of itself to me and I have to constantly adapt to keep up. Eraserhead looked at the boy and began to think about what he had said. Izuku Midoriya, given a quirk that gives him the potential power that gives him the ability of being as strong as All Might. On top of that, he had a lot less time than any other of the participants with his quirk, and yet he managed to outshine the rest of them. He was also able to beat me in single combat by using strategies that normal villains wouldn't have thought of. The question that is next, what is his quirk? What makes it so unique? Kid, this stays between the two of you. As far as everyone knows, you are a late bloomer and happen to have a very flashy quirk. There are people who would hunt you down for what you are capable of doing just to find out the information of how you work. The less people who know of this, the better. Keep this to yourself and tell no one. Izuku nodded and began to get up as the feeling returned to his feet. I know that you have the heart of a hero and the mind of a genius. That much I can tell just by looking at you. The rest is a blank slate. You have proven yourself to act in an instant and that you can keep a cool mind in dangerous situations. I can also see how your eyes move from side to side when you get into thought, which is about a second, so I assume that your powers extend to your mind. I don't know what to say really. It's dash. Izuku began to thank the hero before he took a punch to the stomach and he collapsed onto the floor. The boy never saw it coming, so he fell forward at the normal speed of a human without getting the chance to activate anything. I can also see that you are quite weak when your quirk isn't activated. You are no better than a quirkless person if anyone did manage to mess with your quirk. My particular quirk may not work, but there will be others besides me. I think that you need more training than the fancy tricks that you have practiced for the past month. Izuku groaned as he attempted to get back up, unsure of what had just gone down. Looking at the man's unkempt face, he wondered what he meant by training. This was the hero Eraserhead, who wasn't well known because he had made that choice himself. You will be part of the Class 1A in 2 weeks' time, and I want to make sure that you are capable of handling yourself. Your quirk gives you the speed advantage, but you rely too much on it instead of any other forms of defense. Other kids have had their whole lives to practice combat and have used their quirks in conjunction with anything they picked up. You have neither of those, so you will have to have some training, and I will do what I can with the time that I have. So does this mean that I am now required to call you sensei? I would like to know how to address you for any future reference. Recalling his scarf, Yuku's feet became free once more instead of chained to the other man. You will be here tomorrow at 6 in the morning, and I will try to teach you through brute force and repetition. I know that you heal quickly, and so that means that I won't hold back. Izuku's smile faded a bit at realizing what would happen to him the next day. Also during our sessions, I will not allow you to use your quirk whatever the situation. Nodding, the boy turned away and began to walk back home. That was until the scarf wrapped around his legs and brought him back to the feet of the erasure hero. Well, kid, I never said that you could leave. I need you for one more thing. The boy raised his eyebrows in question, wondering what this additional task was. You know, this was a beach at one point. I expect it to be a beach by morning, if you know what I'm telling you. With that, Eraserhead walked out of the junkyard and used his capture gear to climb onto the building once more. The young boy spent the rest of his time before dinner and after dinner cleaning the beach to most efficiency that his quirk would allow him. He really wasn't sure exactly what he was doing, if he was honest. He had been told to clean the beach by a hero for a purpose that he hadn't explicitly been told. He had assumed that he would be told come morning of what exactly this exercise served to illustrate, but right now he had one thought. That was to make sure that every piece of garbage, down to the last screw, would be lifted from this beach and taken to a proper place. What that place was would be a problem for later on. Despite all that, the boy continued working through the night. He fought back against the fatigue, the pain, the smells, and above all, the piles of trash that threatened to fall on him every few minutes. He stopped a few times along the night in order to make sure that he remained hydrated and that his calories remained at a decent level. Besides that, the speedster continued fighting against all thoughts of giving up and pushed through. At around 4 in the morning, Izuku finally completed his goal, or the goal that had been assigned to him by his future sensei the previous day. Looking around the vastness and sudden cleanness of it, Izuku decided to sit down and look at the ocean. The motion of the waves brought a sudden sense of calmness to him, and the softness of the sand fell just like a blanket. The sound of the ocean was just the song that he needed to hear. It was peaceful and enjoyable. Never before had he had such a wonderful and amazing moment of just looking and enjoying. Waking up inside the ocean wasn't something pleasant, it was terrifying. Shortly after being asleep for about 2 hours, the young hero was woken up by the most unconventional of methods. This, of course, was Eraserhead's doing as a way of bringing him to in the fastest way while waiting the least amount of energy. He simply grabbed the kid's feet and dipped him into the ocean. The kid's arms went up frantically in an attempt to save himself, so the erasure hero simply brought him out of the water before giving him another dip to make sure that he was completely woken up and not just faking it. "I'm awake, just put me down already." The green-haired young Midoriya yelled in hopes of being able to get a few more minutes of rest, which he might or might not receive given his current situation. The erasure hero was currently amused by this fish-out-of-water performance and decided to comply, sort of. He was still holding the boy over the water when he did decide to free him, so Izuku ended up taking an early morning bath in the newly renovated beach. "Gah, why did you have to wake me up like that? I could have gotten up in a less messy way." The boy yelled to the hero dressed in black as he waded out of the water onto the beach that he had cleaned up a few hours previously. The man in question simply threw him a juice box and opened his own. "You were told to be here and ready at 6 in the morning. You weren't ready, and that was the fastest way to do it." Eraserhead wasn't taking any questions at the moment, as could be seen from his facial expressions, which showed fatigue and overall annoyance. "I'm going to test your limits in order to see in what way I should train you. We'll start with a spar, but first dry yourself, would you? Now go and run." Instead of complaining, Izuku swallowed his response as well as the juice that had been given to him. Afterwards he removed his coat and began running, with wet clothes and on a beach no less. This was a problem in the beginning, but after picking up speed his clothes began to dry and he was able to traverse the beach with ease. After a few rounds his clothes were completely dry and he felt just ready for the day to come. "Okay, Aizawa-sensei, I am ready for your instructions." He stood before the hero like a soldier in front of a general, which probably wasn't the best choice. "I do have one concern about this hole." The boy never got the chance to finish the sentence as he was incapacitated almost in an instant by the older hero. "We are here to spar, not to talk. Now, without your speed, try to hit me." Aizawa removed his scarf in order to even out the fight and give the kid a chance. "Well, what are you waiting for? Yui is just around the corner, let's go." Trying to get the upper hand as early as possible, Izuku tried acting before his teacher in attempts to surprise him. This failed spectacularly as Eraserhead used his momentum to toss him onto the softness of the sand. This time he retained his breath within his lungs, but not much was different about this time. Ow, that hurt a lot and I'm only like 30 seconds into this training. He also said he wasn't going to pull any punches since he knows I can heal from it. How far is he going to go? Well, looks like I'll have to find out the hard way from the looks of that incoming kick. Midoriya rolled away from the incoming kick that looked more like a feint than anything, but who was he to say? Wait, that was what that kick was, a feint for another incoming kick that caught him below the ribs. Without his speed he was more like a sitting duck, and that was something that he couldn't allow in the future in case anything happened to him. He got up to all fours and began coughing, trying to get his breath back while also trying to clear his throat. His quirk gave him the faster healing and soon did that for him, which was greatly appreciated. He would have begun crying if he wasn't in the presence of possibly the most insensitive of all the heroes. Okay, Midoriya, you did quite badly in that, but we will try again after you cover that same distance you ran earlier without using your speed. By that I mean that you will have to run from one end of the beach to the other till you cover the same distance that you did earlier when you were trying to dry your clothes. Now go! This was going to be possibly the 2 worst weeks of Izuku's life, but after all was said and done, he would be a better hero for it. Now all he needed was a pair of shoes that wouldn't catch fire. Chapter 7. He was running, that much is what he knew. To where he wasn't. Sure, all he knew is that this wasn't reality. Or he thought he knew that. He faintly recalled his surroundings, as if he had been here before sometime in the past. The large storm around him propelled him forward and at the same time held him back. There was no ground beneath him, but he knew that this was still considered running. His legs moved and stepped on, propelling him to where he assumed was forward. The ground seemed to maybe be energy, but he couldn't be sure. He was beginning to feel something that he had a faint memory of. This was a good feeling, but it was too good for him to stay here. If he didn't get out of here soon, he would simply stay in here forever. He remembered suddenly that he had seen this place before when he was in a coma a few weeks prior. Pushing himself further, the speedster kept going, trying to GT out as soon as he could. He spotted into a white light ahead of him. This was his goal. He ran towards it, into it. Izuku Midoriya's eyes blasted open to allow light passage into his Vison. His alarm clock was going off, clearly signaling his late start to the morning, as it had been happening more and more often. He groaned at this, but worried not, since, with his speed, he could very easily manage to do anything that he wished during the time that it took most people to simply rise from bed. He laid back down and looked at the ceiling, which was becoming a habit that he had developed over the past few weeks. Another bad habit was also beginning to do things later than he should, which tended to make him tardy. During these few minutes that he gave himself, he tended to think about many of his problems and of their possible fixes. Today's problem was merely the first day of school, as well as that odd recurring dream he kept having. Relax, Izuku, you aren't going insane. At least I don't think. No. You are not going insane. This is a side effect of your quirk, since you are always running nowadays and not any other outside force that you don't know about. This isn't something you should worry about. Just remain calm and everything should work out. Besides, you have your first day at UA today, and that should be your main focus if anything is. Looking sideways from his bed, a UA uniform hung from a chair and looked as neat as it could be. He'd put it there the previous night in order to be ready the next day in case he woke up later than usual. He of course had done just that and now was in a tricky situation. In times like this, there really was only one way that he would be able to get through everything that he needed to do: use his quirk to the highest efficiency. He sat on the side of his bed and closed his eyes, trying to gather himself. Tick, took, tick, took. The rhythm of the clock slowed down to a crawl as Izuku's hyper-fast mind took hold and began with his morning schedule. This was something that he could do for a maximum of 1 minute in real time every so often. It required a completely clear mind and nothing else to break his concentration. It also drained him very much, leaving him quite defenseless after using it for too long or at all. He opened his eyes and looked to the clock beta his bed in order to see if his quirk was working as he planned it to. Walking out of his room, the boy saw a plate of food that had been set down by his mother in prediction of what he was about to do. He of course took the plate, and with it he began to run as he packed his bag for the day. In a satchel he tossed pencils, notebooks, and other school supplies that would be needed for the day. Between every school supply tossed, he ate another item of his breakfast as carefully as he could as to not have to go back for it later. After everything was packed, the enhanced individual went on to change into his school uniform, still on his chair, unmoved by the events that were happening around it. Slipping on the blazer of the school onto his shoulders, Izuku Midoriya felt ready to tackle the bull by the horns. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Losing his concentration in a moment, his perception of the world around him returned to normal and he unfortunately collapsed due to fatigue. He caught himself on a chair but was still pretty tired and the time to enter school was nearing. His hands shook a little like they always did after he tried doing this, an unfortunate side effect which he was aware was very unpleasant. Slowly making his way to the door, he supported himself against the walls as to not lose his balance and fall flat on his face. The first time that he did this he was extremely unlucky and ended up smelling like trash for the remainder of the day. He'd improved a bit when controlling it but still nowhere near mastering it. Looking down at his watch, he saw that there were 10 minutes to go before school began. It certainly wasn't enough time to take any mode of public transportation, so he would have to run there himself. Most likely he would end up running at maybe half his normal non-straining speed due to his level of exhaustion at the moment, but it would be more than enough. Slipping a new set of goggles over his eyes and his satchel over his shoulder, the boy exited his home and began his journey to school. It was time for the world to see what he could do. The world, of course, was UA, at least it would be for today. His running was probably the best part of his mornings, besides restocking his calories on large amounts of food, that is. In this state he was able to navigate the streets with such ease and tranquility, not really having to worry about being hurt like this. His eyes were able to spot any incoming accidents involving civilians and he was able to nudge them in just the right direction that prevented them from getting hurt. Another plus was all of the random poses that people were stuck in. It was just so fun to look at them as they went on with their normal lives. Instead of increasing in speed, he slowly decreased as his journey went on. He'd been practicing on how to do so and realized that doing so within a few hundred feet of his destination was a recipe for disaster. Now he simply started fast and slowed down along the way in order to keep himself from going splat on any walls. His exhaustion from using fast life was slowly fading, or at least he hoped that it was in preparation for what Aizawa had warned him happened in the school during the first day. His instructor for the past 2 weeks hadn't explicitly told him anything exactly. He more or less told him to not expect any mercy on the first day of school and that his homeroom teacher would surely come after him for being one of the top students in the exam. He was simply making sure that he was capable of handling himself, or so he had said. The practice with Eraserhead had been one of the worst, no scratch that. It was the definite worst experience in his life. Morning after morning he was forced to push himself to an extreme which he wasn't sure why. If he had 10 months to do a workout like this, then he'd probably be strong enough to inherit someone else's quirk or something along those lines. However, this was more of making him more battle-prone and capable of handling himself in a fight against his sensei, who very regularly was taking down villains with quirks far stronger than the one which he used. Turning his gaze at the watch on his wrist, he nodded, knowing that he had enough time to get to class. He left it there for a moment too long and didn't see UA's massive gates or a person walking into said gates. He really needed a better way to stop himself in these types of situations than trying his usual skidding. That would be a matter for later, considering that he was once skidding into another being and knocking them onto the floor along with himself in what could honestly be called painful. You know, Izuku, I really hate how you don't know how to stop just yet. You really need to figure out how to do that, or I'm going to figure out a way to leave your head and punch you. Nada, could you please pick yourself up and help up that poor person who you hopefully didn't end up killing? It'd be a shame if you did kill someone before you even started training to be a hero. Oh my god, I am so sorry for running into you. Good job, this is like your 4th sorry this month for this exact same thing. Please don't be dead. The other being of the crash groaned in pain as well as they rubbed one side of their head, trying to figure out what just went down. From what he could tell, they were male with black hair and goggles atop their head for some reason. What? You know, don't even worry about it, first day of school and you don't want to be late. I understand the feeling of that. He laughed as he saw Izuku's goggles on the floor. These look like they belong to you, he said as he picked them up and handed them over. Thanks, also I am Izuku by the way. He took his goggles back and put them around his neck before offering his hand in a greeting. The other boy took it with a smile and introduced himself. Francisco Ramon, but you can call me Cisco. I think that the less syllables the better. I'm from support here at UA, what about you? I'm enrolled in heroics. Today's the first day of school and you already said that. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure you're fine. Cisco laughed at this before speaking in an old and mysterious tone. Do or do not. There is no try. You know, Yoda from the Star Wars movies. Laughing at this, Izuku looked at his watch again before cueing his leave. He already was cutting it close as it was. I'd love to stay and chat, but class starts in 2 minutes and I still have no idea where my class is located, so I have to go. Nice meeting you by the way. Cisco gave him a small wave before running off on his own way towards his own homeroom class. Putting his goggles back on, the boy went around looking for the room in which he was supposed to be right now. He was completely lost in this school, but he had no time to do anything about it. What sort of assumptions would his homeroom teacher have about him if he was late on the first day? The first day. Come on Izuku, just look for the number 1 and the letter A. It seriously can't be that difficult to do that. Wait, that's the girl I saved in the entrance exam. That has got to be the room that is mine. No time to think, let's go. Running down the hallway, the green-haired tardy speedster grabbed the frame of the door before skidding into the room. His speed carried him toward the opposite side of the room, where he collided with the wall at his speed, causing the windows to rattle and leaving the faintest of impressions upon the wall. Pulling off his goggles, Izuku saw that the whole room had come to a complete and utter silence at his arrival. All eyes were in his direction and frankly he didn't know what to do about it. He simply gave all of them a small wave and went to find his seat wherever that might be. Midoriya, it's good to see that you made it on time. This was from Ida, who hadn't heard from Izuku since he had informed him of his acceptance into the UA Heroics course. I thought that you had gone off on your own after not hearing from you for so long. Izuku chucked and was about to respond before another of his classmates began to speak over him. Izuku, what did happen to you? You were completely unresponsive for 2 entire weeks. I was worried something had happened to you. This was Momo, who had attempted to contact him several times, but he had simply had no energy to answer back. Scratching the back of his head, Izuku smiled and went on to explain his situation, or partly anyway. Well, these past 2 weeks I've been trying to extend my abilities beyond just my quirk, and that took a lot out of me, but there was quite a lot cursing that followed that explanation from someone who Izuku knew only too well. Mentally, he groaned in annoyance, but his facial expressions couldn't show the same range of emotions that were going on in his mind. FNG Deku with a quirk. You must have cheated your way into the school. There is absolutely no way a quirkless loser like you would be allowed into the same school as me. Bakugu clearly still wasn't willing to accept the reality that Izuku now was his equal in many ways. He'd been his superior most of his life, and the sudden shift in power wasn't something that his mind could take easily. Wait, you're the boy who saved me during the entrance exam. This time it was the brown-haired girl who had just entered the classroom before him. She had a wide smile on her face and a genuine look of thankfulness. I didn't get a chance to thank you since you left so suddenly, but I wanted to tell you that I appreciated what you were able to do during the exam. My name's Ochako, by the way, Ochako Uraraka. Had there been more time, Izuku was sure that he'd probably introduce himself as well and probably meet the rest of his classmates right there and there. That, however, wasn't what happened in that instant. Instead, caterpillar-shaped creature crawled into the classroom and went right behind the teacher's desk. It kinda rolled its way slowly towards the desk, if he was trying to be technical about it. There was a large suctioning noise that echoed throughout the classroom, and Izuku's mind went off the rails. No, this is not happening to me, not like this. Please tell me that we are just going to have a caterpillar-themed hero and not who I think it is. Those were the 2 worst weeks any human could have gone through, and now he's going to do that to everyone in this class. All I wanted was a decent amount of training from a hero who doesn't take utter delight in making sure that I know how sand tastes. Please don't let it be. No matter how much he wished it, there really wasn't anything that he could do. The figure that had been in the cocoon emerged from behind the desk and looked at all the students. The students' faces were an ocean of different expressions, all displayed clearly for all to see. Some were horrified, others were confused, still others were simply scared of the man dressed in black clothing who looked like he hadn't shaved in a few days. If anyone would have looked, they would have seen Izuku had his face in his hands, crying tears of pure confusion. Aizawa saw this and smiled. Well, it was more of a smirk. Really, it was just a twitch at the lips. He wasn't going to let these kids know what he could do just yet, or that he was capable of smiling. That would be as soon as someone made the wrong move, and right now the purple kid was looking where he shouldn't be, so he would possibly be the first one. He pulled out a UA athletic uniform from his sleeping bag and held it for all to see. Hello, I am your homeroom teacher, Shoyuta Aizawa. Come up and grab one of these, then go change and meet me outside on the courtyard. Despite their horror-filled faces, they all followed through and grabbed an athletic uniform before rushing out to change, trying to put distance between themselves and their clearly senile homeroom teacher. Well, one student stayed behind to talk to him, and boy was he happy to see his mentor. WW, what are you doing here? Izuku was clearly nervous, and this confrontation was taking a lot out of him. The teacher noticed this and openly smiled, believing that Izuku earned the right to see him do so. I'm a teacher here. Where else would I teach? Why didn't I think of that? It was so obvious. And why are you still standing there? I'm still your teacher and you are still a part of this class. He exited the class, making his way to the courtyard, but he turned to his student before doing so. Also, Midoriya, you better push yourself or I'm going to make your life a living hell from now on. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, living in my head. I am a dead man as of pretty much now. Well, this could certainly be much worse, so there is no use complaining about this. I just have to hope that he doesn't try to kill us first thing in the morning. Without anything else, Izuku went and grabbed himself a uniform from within the bag of his teacher. Walking out of the room, he looked around and saw that everyone had deserted the corridor, leaving him once again in a state of isolation. He decided to bring his goggles with him as well, since he had grown accustomed to using them in order to move without concern about his eyes, considering that fly incident. As his class gathered around the desired location, Midoriya's brain began to analyze his classmates and see what their obvious quirks were as well as the practical uses of them. He unconsciously smiled as he had not done this in the longest time, and it felt so good to do it once more. Okay, so that's obviously the Pikachu guy that I knocked over in the entrance exam. That girl's quirk appears to have mutated her skin pink, which I can't make out yet. The boy with red and white hair has yet to speak at all and hasn't made any significant facial expressions, so I don't think that I can approach him about his quirk. That there's an invisible girl, a guy with a tail, and that the guy who stole my points at the exam? You know, it's alright, it's in the past, so nothing else that I can do about it. Hey, does that guy have 6 arms? Izuku's curious mind got the better of him as he began looking at all of his classmates more than would have been acceptable. The one thing that prevented him from being noticed was that he was able to look away faster than anyone could look in his direction. After all, how else was he going to examine 19 other quirks? That frog quirk looks interesting. Can she do anything a frog can? What is up with the hawk head? Maybe a part of his quirk or something along those lines. You're doing it again. Izuku's head shot up as his cheeks gained a generous shade of red. He'd gotten better at controlling his muttering, but there were still times that it got the better of him. He turned his head to the left where a very bored-looking man looked back at him. Arg, he was standing right next to me the entire time, wasn't he? Yes, I was standing next to you the entire time. Since training with the Erasure Hero, his mentor had gotten incredibly good at just knowing what he was thinking. It was probably due to how fidgety he was, but it was still extremely annoying when all he wanted was a tad bit of room to think. Making himself known to the rest of the group, the teacher clothed in black stepped forward in front of them. Immediately all conversations ceased as all eyes turned to the person who controlled what happened to them. Midoriya, could you come here please? Even though it was a question, it wasn't. If he had learned anything from his teacher in the past 2 weeks, it was that there was always a place and time to push people to their extremes. He had done it to him more counts than he could count, and he could count pretty darn high. If he didn't know better, he'd say that this was going to let Eraserhead know exactly what each and every single one of them could do. Midoriya, stop muttering to yourself and come here. His voice was slightly less bored but still bored enough to show that he didn't care much. Please step into the circle and throw this ball as far as you can. He threw a ball directly at his face, which would have hit him in the face if he didn't have the speed that he did. Pulling back his arm, Izuku threw the ball as hard as he could without any additional assistance from the speed which could enhance his quirk. To everyone's surprise, it went an unbelievable, just impossible, 30 feet away from where he stood. Aizawa smiled, knowing exactly what his pupil was playing at. Perhaps he had learned a thing or two from being with him for the last few weeks. Midoriya, may you go fetch the ball and come back to the circle, with haste if you can? The class was extremely confused at what he was getting at. They had expected a little more from their first day at the world-renowned school for heroics. They were just a bit surprised when Izuku zoomed to the ball and then back to the circle which he had been standing in all in about a second. All of them would surely agree that he was quite fast. Now throw the ball using your speed. Nice wording, sensei. You didn't want to call it a quirk since you can't seem to erase it. Well, I have to applaud you for. Don't get snarky and throw the ball. How does he do it? Looking down at the ball in his hand, Izuku smiled, knowing that this was a show of strength and that his teacher had warned about what would happen if he didn't go all out. He closed his eyes for a moment as he pictured in his brain exactly what he was about to do. The crowd was silent in anticipation, wondering what he would do in order to throw it, considering his quirk was speed. Everyone watched as Izuku slipped on his goggles and stood tall in a T formation. Then he began to spin round and round. At first it was slow and painful to watch, but then it increased in pace. Soon their eyes had trouble seeing Izuku and a blur of blue and green could be seen instead. That's when the winds began to pick up and the dust around Izuku began to form a miniature tornado of dust, leaving all the students staring in awe. Just when no one thought it could get any more impressive, Izuku let the ball soar and the tornado dispersed in an instant. The ball flew out of sight and Izuku laughed as he struggled to maintain his footing. This was the first time that he had tried such a move, and boy was he dizzy. The ground seemed to be moving up and down without his control, so walking forward was probably not the best move considering that he also had super speed. He shot straight towards the crowd and was surprisingly caught by the unemotional teacher. His scarf wrapped itself around Izuku's waist and gently put him down. He'd gotten better at predicting the boy's movements and quicker if he'd say so himself. Well, Midoriya, I have to say that I'm underwhelmed that only 953 feet. Izuku attempted to argue at this but, still with little balance, went stumbling into Ida and Momo, who thankfully caught him before he face planted onto the ground. As you've all seen that this is what all of you are going to be doing, that I'm going to measure how much your quirks can do, and at the end you will all be ranked from highest to lowest. The class began to become extremely nervous at this. When they said they wanted more out of their first day, they certainly hadn't expected this. Izuku noted that the purple boy a few people down from him was starting to become extremely nervous. He would be too if he hadn't expected this beforehand from his teacher. Oh, there's something I forgot to mention. Oh no, don't say it, just don't say it, it's the first day, so just keep it to yourself. And the person ranked lowest in the class will unfortunately be transferred downwards into general studies, while a pre-selected individual will be brought upwards. There was a deafening silence that could be heard from anywhere in the school at the moment as all members of Class 1A wondered about their future in the heroics course. Remember these words, for they are the school's motto and have helped produce heroes from all parts, plus ultra. Lining up for the 50-meter dash, Izuku Midoriya went up against his friend and fellow runner Tenya Ida. Both knew how this outcome would end, but it was still fun for the both of them who had pushed each other to be better when it came to speed. The rest of the class eagerly stood on the sidelines wondering what Izuku would do this time, as he had blown away all their expectations in the demonstration. Good luck, Ida. Remember to move your arms as well in order to get the fastest time possible. The blue-haired teen smiled at the advice that he was given, knowing full well that it was intended to improve him. Midoriya always did have the best intention for others' mind. You too, Midoriya, hope to see you gain a new personal best out of this. The now goggle-wearing boy laughed at this and readied himself to take the cake. Aizawa, who was standing along with the other students, looked at the possibly two fastest people in his class and knew that it was best to do it this way, as friendly rivalry often pushed quirks further. And start. Both boys ran off and were done before anyone could really say anything about their performance. Lots of dust was kicked up and a cloud of it took to the air, preventing anyone from seeing anything besides the first second. They heard a loud ouch, which sounded like it was from the faster of the two boys, but they couldn't be sure. Everyone tried seeing what the two scores were, knowing it would be equally crazy for both of them. Although they had been unable to see, the machine had picked up the moment they crossed the finish line, so that was more than what they needed. The two scores on the machine were that of 0.11666667 and 2.9 seconds, which would probably be the fastest that any one of them would be able to complete this. As the cloud of dust disappeared, everyone saw that this time Izuku had faceplants onto the ground and was just kinda lying there without much attempt to move. Besides him, there was Ida trying to get him to get up and allow the other students to go, but what could really be done? What followed this were a variety of other tests that were meant to test the limits of people's quirks in order to determine who would be staying and who would be the one to leave. Sidestep, strength test, standing long jump, touching toes, baseball throw. Each test was dominated by one or more people who looked as if they would be the one to stay. Thanks to his earlier feats in the ball throw and the 50-meter dash, Izuku didn't have to worry about being taken out of the heroics program. He could say the same for Uraraka, who had gotten infinity in the ball throw, Shuji, who had proven to be the strongest in the class, the kid who stole his points having mastered the standing long jump, and many other students. Looks like most of this class has quirks made more or less for these particular tests. Everyone has that one thing for them that they excel at above everyone else. Now for the moment of truth. After the last person had been tested, the results went into